Let the day fade away. Settle into your bed or favorite chair, lower the lights, and let's take a slow journey into the past. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. If you think joining an exclusive club today requires a fat wallet and a few well-placed connections, you haven't heard about the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, these weren't just any shindigs. We're talking about a secretive religious rite from ancient Greece that makes modern-day secret societies look like open book clubs. Held in the city of Eleusis, just a hop, skip, and a chariot ride of 14 miles from Athens, these mysteries were the ancient world's VIP event, and entry was as elusive as finding a needle in a haystack. So, what were these mysteries all about? Well, that's the million drachma question, because the initiates were tighter-lipped than a politician during a scandal. What we do know is that they revolved around the myth of Demeter and Persephone. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was searching for her daughter Persephone, who had been kidnapped by Hades. This myth wasn't just a bedtime story, it was the foundation of the mysteries and supposedly offered initiates some sweet afterlife perks, which, considering the lack of modern healthcare, was a pretty big deal. But let's talk economics for a moment. You might be thinking, how expensive could a religious ceremony be? Well, the ancient Greeks weren't exactly cutting costs when it came to sacred rituals. Initiates had to pay to play, and the price wasn't just in silver coins. The journey to Eleusis involved more than a mere walk in the park. Pilgrims had to travel, sometimes across the Mediterranean, which was as risky as trying to hitchhike on a freeway. Even if you made it past the treacherous seas, you needed to shell out a substantial initiation fee. While the exact amount is lost to history, it's safe to say it was enough to make a Spartan blink. And what did these initiates get for their troubles and drachmas? That's where things get murky. The whole affair was shrouded in secrecy, with participants sworn to silence under threat of divine retribution, or worse, expulsion. This exclusivity only added to the allure, making it the must-attend event of the ancient calendar. Think of it as Coachella meets the Vatican, only without the Instagram posts because, they didn't have Wi-Fi or cameras. Or, well, you get the idea. The Eleusinian mysteries weren't just a spiritual affair, they were a social one too. The ancient Greeks loved their festivals, and this was the ultimate mix of piety and party. It was a chance for Greeks from all over to mingle, network, and perhaps even strike a few business deals. In an age where a handshake meant more than a signed contract, these gatherings were an economic powerhouse. The local economy of Eleusis thrived, with merchants and vendors cashing in on the influx of pilgrims. Even the city of Athens benefited, with its leaders often using the event to flex their political muscles and diplomacy skills. Now, you might be wondering about the allure of such a secretive rite. Why did it captivate the imagination of so many over centuries? It's simple. Who doesn't love a good mystery? The tantalizing promise of hidden knowledge, the allure of being part of an exclusive group, and the hope of an afterlife upgrade were enough to make anyone hop on a trireme. Plus, let's face it, the thought of a goddess sharing her secrets was way more interesting than listening to another philosopher drone on about the nature of the universe. But before you pack your bags and head to Greece in search of ancient enlightenment, let's debunk a few myths. First, the notion that all initiates were transformed into enlightened beings is, well, a bit romanticized. While the mysteries were undoubtedly a profound spiritual experience, they were also a reflection of the social and political dynamics of the time. The rites served as a tool for social cohesion, reinforcing the power structures of ancient Greek society. By participating, initiates reaffirmed their place within these hierarchies, a fact often glossed over by the more mystical narratives. In the end, the Eleusinian mysteries are a testament to the human desire for connection, meaning, and a little bit of mystery. They remind us that even in the ancient world, people were drawn to the allure of the unknown, the promise of something greater than themselves. And while the specifics of the rites remain a closely guarded secret, the impact they had on Greek society is undeniable. So, the next time you find yourself drawn to a secretive club or exclusive event, remember, you're following in the footsteps of countless Greeks who, 2 millennia ago, sought the same elusive truths. While the Greeks were busy with their Eleusinian escapades, the Romans had their own brand of secretive fun, the Mithraic mysteries. Now, If you've ever been to a modern-day speakeasy, you might get the vibe only swapped the hipster mixologists for Roman soldiers and the underground bar for literal underground temples. Yes, the Mithraic Mysteries were the Roman Empire's clandestine club, minus the craft cocktails. The initiates of the Mithraic Mysteries were sworn to secrecy, and boy did they carry that promise to their graves almost literally. Unlike the Eleusinian page-turners, Mithraic rites were so hush-hush that most of what we know comes from ruins of temples and the occasional cryptic carving. These temples, known as Mithraea, were cosy caverns tucked away beneath the bustling Roman cities, perfect for keeping prying eyes out and the mystery in. They were usually small, dimly lit, and could accommodate only about 30 people. Talk about an exclusive guest list. And while we're at it, these temples were often adorned with starry ceilings, giving them the celestial ambience of a cosmic rave. The central figure of these mysteries was Mithras, a deity of, well, somewhat mysterious origins. While his worship spread across the Roman Empire, he's thought to have roots in Persian mythology. Picture a god who's a bit like James Bond, often depicted slaying a cosmic bull, an act believed to symbolize the triumph of good over evil, or perhaps just a really intense barbecue. This bull-slaying scene, known as the tauroctony, was the focal point of Mithraic art and worship. It's like having a giant mural of the house band in your favorite club. Astrology played a starring role in the Mithraic Mysteries. Think of it as the ancient version of checking your horoscope, but with more ritualistic flair. The 7 grades of initiation were named after the 7 known planets of the time, and each level supposedly offered deeper cosmic insights. From Corax Raven to Pater Father, these ranks were as hierarchical as a corporate ladder, only with more incense and less email. The rituals involved elaborate meals and shared secrets, which, if you ask me, sounds suspiciously like a Roman dinner party with a side of spiritual enlightenment. Economically speaking, the Mithraic Mysteries were a bit of an underground economy themselves. Initiates had to contribute to the temple coffers, and these contributions weren't just about keeping the candles lit. Participating in these mysteries was as much about social networking as it was about spiritual awakening. The cult primarily attracted soldiers and merchants, people who thrived on connections and camaraderie. Joining the Mithraic Mysteries was like getting a membership to an exclusive network of like-minded individuals who could help you climb the imperial ladder, or at least ensure you had a friend in the next legion. Now, let's dispel a few myths. First, despite what some wild theories suggest, the Mithraic Mysteries were not the Roman Empire's Illuminati. They didn't secretly run the world, though they might have offered a nice distraction from the daily grind of empire building. The rites were an exclusive club, yes, but the secrecy was more about maintaining the allure and sacredness of their practices than orchestrating global domination. Moreover, while the appeal of these mysteries might have been their promise of otherworldly knowledge, the reality was more grounded. The Mithraic Mysteries provided a sense of belonging and identity, especially for the soldiers who were far from home. In a way, these rites were a psychological salve for the lonely and the ambitious, offering them a taste of the cosmic while keeping their feet firmly planted in Roman soil. In the grand scheme of things, the Mithraic Mysteries remind us that the human desire for connection and meaning transcends time. The allure of hidden knowledge and exclusive clubs is as old as history itself, and whether it's a secret Roman cult or a modern-day VIP lounge, the appeal remains the same. So, next time you find yourself drawn to the velvet rope of exclusivity, remember that you're sharing in a tradition that's as ancient as it is enduring. And who knows, maybe that club membership will lead you to your own cosmic revelations, or at least a good story for the ages. The allure of hidden wisdom isn't just a Roman or Greek thing. It's slithered its way into the very sands of ancient Egypt with the cult of the serpent. Now, before you start picturing Indiana Jones battling snakes, which, let's be honest, is a pretty fun mental image, let's dive into how serpents went from creepy crawlers to divine symbols. These weren't just garden-variety snakes. They were cosmic entities intertwined with Egyptian cosmology, politics, and economics. In the land of pyramids and pharaohs, serpents weren't just for herpetologists. They were revered as sacred creatures, embodying both chaos and protection. The Egyptians, notorious for their deity mashups, saw snakes as avatars of the goddess Wadjet, a protective deity often depicted as a cobra. Wadjet wasn't your run-of-the-mill garden snake. She was a fiery protector of kings, often shown on the brow of pharaohs as the uraeus, ready to spit fire at enemies. Talk about a headpiece with benefits. But the cult of the serpent wasn't just about fashion-forward headdresses. It was a complex web of religion and politics, with its influence coiling through the corridors of power. Pharaohs didn't just wear the cobra for style points. It was a divine endorsement. When you're ruling a kingdom that spans from the Nile Delta to Nubia, having a celestial snake on your side isn't just a nice-to-have, it's essential. The cult's reach went beyond the regal brow of pharaohs. It extended into the temples and the towns, weaving through the everyday lives of Egyptians. Temples dedicated to Wadjet and other serpent deities became centers of worship and economic activity. These weren't just places of spiritual solace, they were bustling hubs where religion and commerce intertwined. Pilgrims would come, offerings in hand, hoping for a divine nod from Wadjet. The priests, adept at managing both spiritual and material wealth, ensured that the temple coffers never ran dry. It's like running a divine stock exchange, where the currency was faith and the dividends were protection. Now, here's where the cult of the serpent really gets interesting. In a world where political power and religious authority were often two sides of the same coin, the cult's influence was a kingmaker. The support of Wadjet's priesthood could bolster a pharaoh's claim to the throne, making serpentine approval a political necessity. Imagine needing a snake's blessing before you could rule. Talk about a reptilian rite of passage. Of course, with great power comes great mythology. The romantic appeal of the serpentine cult has inspired countless tales, from the biblical serpent in Eden to modern interpretations in pop culture, like the iconic image of Cleopatra with an asp. But let's not get too carried away with the Hollywood glamour. While it's tempting to see Cleopatra's snakebite as a dramatic act of defiance, the reality was likely more calculated. The asp represented a quick, painless exit, a final act of control in a world where power was as slippery as, well, a snake. Economically, the cult had its fangs in multiple pies. Temples were not just spiritual centers, but economic powerhouses. They owned land, managed resources, and collected offerings, effectively making them ancient banks. The priests, acting as both religious leaders and economic managers, wielded influence that could rival the pharaohs themselves. It was a delicate dance of power, where the priesthood and the throne needed each other, yet constantly vied for dominance. But let's debunk a few myths while we're here. The image of the serpent as an all-powerful deity who controlled Egypt from the shadows is, frankly, a bit of a stretch. While serpents held significant spiritual and political sway, they were part of a much larger tapestry of beliefs and power structures. The Egyptians, ever the pragmatists, knew that divine symbols were as much about politics as they were about piety. The serpent was a tool, a powerful one, yes, but a tool nonetheless in the grand game of maintaining order and authority in a civilization that thrived on both. In modern times, the echoes of the cult of the serpent slither through pop culture, from the serpentine imagery in fantasy novels to the snake-tattooed anti-heroes of cinema. The allure of the serpent endures, captivating our imaginations with its blend of danger and divinity. It's a testament to the enduring power of symbols, and how, even thousands of years later, we're still drawn to the mystery and magic of the ancient world. As we unravel the secrets of the cult of the serpent, it becomes clear that its legacy is as much about human nature as it is about history. The yearning for protection, the quest for power, and the allure of the unknown are as old as civilization itself. Whether it's a serpent on a pharaoh's brow or a modern-day myth, the dance between reality and romance continues to enchant. So next time you see a snake, remember, you're not just looking at a reptile, you're glimpsing a symbol that has slithered its way through human history, leaving a trail of mystery and intrigue in its wake. Now, while the Egyptians were busy charming snakes out of their baskets, medieval Europe was weaving a tapestry of its own with the enigmatic threads of Kabbalah. Picture a world where Jewish mysticism and philosophy intermingle like a medieval cocktail party, and you've got the essence of Kabbalistic rites. These weren't your run-of-the-mill religious practices. No, Kabbalah was the spiritual equivalent of a secret menu at your favorite coffee shop, hidden, coveted, and often misunderstood. Let's dive into the heart of this mystical maze and start by debunking some of the myths. The Kabbalah wasn't just about mystical mumbo-jumbo or casting spells, despite what pop culture might have you believe. It was a serious intellectual pursuit, a spiritual philosophy wrapped in the enigma of numbers and letters. Born in the 12th century, Kabbalah is Hebrew for receiving, and it was all about receiving divine wisdom. But let's be clear, this wasn't wisdom you could snag at the local library. You had to earn it, often through years of study and contemplation. The allure of Kabbalah was its promise of understanding the universe's secrets, and who wouldn't want a piece of that cosmic pie? It was a heady mix of mysticism and metaphysics, where numbers weren't just numbers, but keys to unlocking the mysteries of the divine. And speaking of numbers, Kabbalists were all about the math. They believed that the Hebrew alphabet was more than just letters. It was a code that, when deciphered, could reveal the secrets of creation. It's kind of like seeing the universe as one giant Sudoku puzzle, and who doesn't love a good brain teaser? But let's not get too starry-eyed. The path to Kabbalah wasn't lined with rose petals. Medieval Europe wasn't exactly a bastion of tolerance, and Jews often found themselves on the receiving end of persecution. The socio-political climate was as stormy as a Shakespearean drama, with Jews frequently scapegoated for society's ills. Yet, amidst this turbulence, Kabbalah emerged as a beacon of spiritual resilience. It offered a sense of identity and hope, providing a spiritual anchor in a world that often felt adrift. Now, if you're thinking that Kabbalah spread like wildfire through medieval Europe, think again. This wasn't a mass movement, but rather an exclusive club, with entry requirements stiffer than a bouncer at a trendy nightclub. You didn't just walk into Kabbalah, you had to be invited. And while we're on the topic of exclusivity, let's talk about the economic context. These weren't cheap pursuits. Engaging with Kabbalistic texts required resources, not just in terms of books and materials, but in time that could have been spent working or tending to daily survival. The luxury of contemplation was often reserved for those who could afford it, making Kabbalah both an intellectual and economic pursuit. In this intellectual playground, the Zohar emerged as the cornerstone text of Kabbalah. Written in the late 13th century, the Zohar is a mystical commentary on the Torah, blending narrative, theology, and philosophy into a complex tapestry of ideas. Sound daunting? It was. The Zohar wasn't a breezy read, it was dense, esoteric, and required some serious mental gymnastics to interpret. Yet it held an irresistible allure, promising insights into the divine nature of the universe. But let's not sugarcoat the reality. The romantic notion of Kabbalists as mystical sages with one foot in the ethereal realm is, well, a bit of a stretch. In reality, they were scholars, often grappling with the same existential questions that have puzzled humanity for centuries. Their work was as much about intellectual rigor as it was about spiritual insight. They didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to ask the questions, and in a world where certainty was often imposed, that was a radical act. The socio-political backdrop of Kabbalah's emergence can't be ignored. Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms and principalities, each with its own power struggles and religious tensions. In this volatile environment, Kabbalah offered a form of spiritual escapism, a way to transcend the earthly fray and connect with something greater. For Jews living under the constant threat of expulsion or violence, Kabbalah was not just a spiritual practice, but a lifeline, a way to maintain a sense of identity and purpose in a world that often denied them both. Of course, the very mystique that made Kabbalah alluring also made it a target of suspicion. The secrecy and complexity of its teachings led to wild speculations and, inevitably, myths. Some saw it as a form of magic, others as a heretical deviation from mainstream Judaism. The truth, as always, was more nuanced. Kabbalah was a deeply spiritual practice, but it was also a product of its time, shaped by the socio-political and economic realities of medieval Europe. So, what's the takeaway here? Kabbalah's continued allure lies in its blend of mystery and meaning, its promise of deeper truths in a world that often feels superficial. It's the ultimate intellectual adventure, a journey through the labyrinth of the mind and spirit. And while the myths are tantalizing, the reality is just as compelling, a testament to the human desire for knowledge, connection, and transcendence. As we wrap up this segment, the story of Kabbalah remains as intricate as the mystical diagrams that fill its pages. It's a tale of resilience in the face of adversity, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of knowledge and spirituality can shine through. Stay tuned as we continue our exploration of history's hidden rites, uncovering the mysteries that continue to captivate our imaginations and stir our souls. Ah, the dance between light and shadow, knowledge and mystery. It's a tale as old as time, and nowhere does it play out more dramatically than with the Thuggee cult of India. Now, if your mental image is of Victorian-era mustachioed officers chasing sinister bandits through the jungles of India, you're halfway there. But let's peel back the layers of myth and find the gritty reality underneath. Spoiler alert, the truth is as tangled as a mystery novel, with a colonial twist. The Thuggees, often romanticized as a secret brotherhood devoted to the goddess Kali, have long been depicted as the bogeymen of British India. These supposed highwaymen were said to be responsible for the deaths of thousands, all in the name of religious fervour. But before we dive into this morass of myth and murder, let's pause. The term Thuggee itself comes from the Hindi word thag, meaning deceiver or cheat. So, right off the bat, we're dealing with folks who loved a good con as much as a good ritual. Let's set the scene. We're talking about the late 18th to early 19th centuries, a period when the British East India Company was spreading its tentacles across the Indian subcontinent like an imperial octopus. The British, in their quest for control and profit, stumbled upon the Thuggees, or so the story goes. These men were supposedly banded together in a covert criminal fraternity, strangling travellers with silk scarves and looting their goods. The numbers are staggering. Estimates suggest anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 victims over decades, although, like many colonial records, these figures might be more fantasy than fact. But what was the economic reality behind these chilling tales? The Indian subcontinent was a patchwork of princely states, each with its own economy, politics, and social structures. In this milieu, banditry wasn't just a hobby, it was a survival strategy. Many Thuggees were believed to be landless peasants or displaced soldiers seeking livelihood in a tumultuous time. The colonial narratives painted them as bloodthirsty fanatics, yet it's likely that economic desperation played a significant role in their alleged crimes. Enter William Sleeman, a British officer who became the self-proclaimed Sherlock Holmes of Thuggee suppression. He led widespread campaigns to eradicate the cult, capturing and executing hundreds of suspected Thuggees. Sleeman's reports, filled with dramatic confessions and sensational anecdotes, became the stuff of legend. But here's the twist. While Sleeman's efforts garnered him fame and a hefty dose of colonial swagger, his accounts have been criticized for exaggeration and bias. Some historians argue that the Thuggee phenomenon was inflated to justify British intervention and control, a convenient narrative to paint themselves as the saviours of a lawless land. And what about the cult's supposed worship of Kali? The romantic image of the Thuggees as devout followers of the goddess of death and destruction is tantalizing, but it's not entirely accurate. While some rituals may have invoked Kali, the Thuggees didn't have a monopoly on reverence for this deity. Kali was a complex figure within Hinduism, embodying both protection and annihilation. The British fixation on Kali as the Thuggees' patroness was likely more a product of cultural misunderstanding and perhaps a dash of Orientalist fantasy than fact. Economically, the campaign against the Thuggees had its perks for the British. By stamping out the so-called menace, the East India Company could ensure safer trade routes and bolster their image as benevolent rulers. The crackdown also helped consolidate power, as local rulers who failed to control the Thuggee problem were often replaced by more pliant leaders. So, what's the legacy of the Thuggee cult today? It's a fascinating blend of fact and fiction, woven into the tapestry of colonial history. The allure of secret rites and shadowy brotherhoods continues to captivate our imaginations, feeding into modern myths and pop culture narratives. Just think of the Indiana Jones film, Temple of Doom, which borrowed liberally from these tales, albeit with a Hollywood flair that had more to do with box office magic than historical accuracy. Reflecting on these secret rites, from the Eleusinian mysteries to the Thuggees, we see a common thread, the human fascination with the unknown. There's a part of us that's irresistibly drawn to the idea of hidden knowledge, of being part of an exclusive club that holds the keys to mysteries beyond the mundane. It's this allure that keeps these stories alive, passed down through generations, morphing with each retelling. But let's not forget the socio-economic realities that often underpin these legends. Behind every myth, There are real people, driven by the same needs and desires that have propelled humanity forward since time immemorial. Whether it's the Greek initiates seeking divine favor, Roman soldiers yearning for camaraderie, Egyptians looking for protection, or medieval scholars craving enlightenment, the stories of these rites are as much about survival and identity as they are about mystery and magic. In the end, secret rites remind us of the duality of human nature, our capacity for both reverence and rebellion, for seeking connection and wielding power. They are a testament to the complexity of our history, a mirror reflecting our deepest fears and highest aspirations. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. The secret rites of the past might be shrouded in mystery, but they illuminate the timeless quest for meaning that defines us all. And who knows, perhaps in the quiet corners of your dreams, you'll catch a glimpse of the mysteries that still whisper through the corridors of time. China, that sprawling giant of the East, was not just a land of silk and tea. It was a place where geography and necessity birthed some of the most practical military innovations of the ancient world. Forget the Hollywood vision of warriors with perfect hair waving shiny swords under cherry blossoms. In reality, ancient Chinese warfare was more about mud, grit, and the relentless drive to outsmart an enemy who was usually just over the next hill. Let's talk about the lay of the land first. Ancient China was like a game of Risk, with a map full of natural barriers and a whole lot of ambition. The north had the Great Wall. Yes, the one built to keep out the vexing hordes of nomads who thought nothing of popping over for an unwelcome raid. Meanwhile, the Yangtze River snaked its way through the heartland, a natural defense line that doubled as a transport superhighway. But it wasn't just geography that kept rulers up at night with a cup of tea and some serious anxiety. The political landscape was just as treacherous. We're talking about a patchwork quilt of warring states, each itching to be top dog in a dog-eat-dog world. Now let's dive into the toolkit of the ancient Chinese warrior. Enter the crossbow, the unsung hero of practicality over pizzazz. The crossbow was the ancient version of a Swiss army knife, compact, versatile, and deadly efficient. While swords and spears demanded a bit of brute strength and flair, the crossbow was the weapon of choice for those who preferred their warfare with a side of precision. This little gem could shoot arrows at a speed that would have made even a seasoned sprinter impressed, all thanks to its clever mechanics. The earliest versions date back to the 5th century BCE, during the Warring States period, when statesmen like Sun Tzu were penning down their cheat codes for war, or as he called it, the art of war. Why was the crossbow such a big deal? Well, for starters, it leveled the playing field. You didn't need to be a muscle-bound warrior to wield one. Even the scrawniest soldier could wreak havoc from a distance. With its trigger mechanism, it allowed for more accurate shooting, something that was crucial when your life might depend on hitting a target no bigger than a watermelon at 100 paces. And in a society where survival often depended on being the quickest to adapt, the crossbow was a game-changer. It meant less time training archers and more time getting down to the real business of war-winning. But before we start romanticizing the idea of crossbowmen as the ancient world snipers, let's burst that bubble with a dose of reality. Using a crossbow wasn't all about lounging in the sun, picking off enemies like ducks in a carnival game. These things were heavy, cumbersome, and required a fair bit of maintenance. Soldiers lugging them around would have traded their left arm for a wheelbarrow after a day's march. And let's not even start on reloading under pressure. It was a fiddly, nerve-wracking business that made you wish for a backup plan. Speaking of plans, ancient Chinese warfare wasn't just about who had the biggest army or the fanciest toys. It was about strategy, playing the long game, like chess with very real consequences. Take the spring and autumn period, roughly 771 to 476 BCE, a time when alliances were as fickle as the weather. Territory was constantly shifting hands, and leaders were judged not just by the battles they won, but by the clever maneuvers they pulled off to avoid them altogether. Diplomacy was a weapon, and deceit was an art form. Forget about the knight in shining armor. It was more about the diplomat with a silver tongue and a hidden knife. Now, the myth of the noble warrior. We all love a good story of chivalry, don't we? The valiant knight, the brave samurai legends that have been polished to a shine over millennia. But in ancient China, warfare was less about personal honor and more about collective survival. The focus was on the group, not the individual. Soldiers were cogs in a much larger machine, valued for their discipline and ability to follow orders. Glory was found in victory, not in personal feats of daring. And let's not forget the economic reality. War was expensive, and ancient China wasn't exactly flushed with unlimited resources. Every arrow, every sword, every piece of armor had a cost. Armies needed to be fed, clothed, and equipped, often stretching the state's coffers to their limits. The crossbow, with its ability to make even the most inexperienced soldier deadly, was an economical choice. It was the ancient equivalent of getting more bang for your buck, or in this case, more bite for your bolt. So, what's the takeaway from all this? The romantic image of ancient Chinese warfare, with its noble warriors and epic battles, is just one side of the story. The other side is a tale of ingenuity, practicality, and the harsh realities of survival. It's about using what you have to get what you need, whether that's a patch of land, a political alliance, or simply staying alive until the next battle. In the end, the ancient Chinese military innovations were not about showing off. They were about staying one step ahead in a world where standing still was not an option. And speaking of staying one step ahead, no discussion about ancient Chinese military strategy would be complete without diving headfirst into that behemoth of a misnomer, the Great Wall of China. Ah, the Great Wall, a name that evokes images of a singular, majestic structure snaking its way across mountains, valleys, and postcard landscapes. But spoiler alert, the Great Wall wasn't so much a single wall as it was a collection of various walls, built at different times, by different dynasties, for different reasons. It was less a grand architectural statement and more a series of desperate attempts at border control. Like a patchwork quilt made of stone and blood, it sprawled over 13,000 miles, give or take, depending on who's doing the measuring. Now, if you've ever been under the impression that this mammoth construction was impenetrable, think again. The Great Wall was about as impenetrable as a sieve when it came to determined invaders. The Mongols, for instance, breezed through it in the 13th century like it was merely a suggestion. So, let's address the elephant, or rather, the horse in the room. The wall wasn't built just to keep people out. It was about as much about keeping people in. Rulers weren't just worried about northern invaders, they were also keen to prevent their own subjects from skedaddling to greener pastures. But why go through all this trouble for a wall that had more holes than a block of Swiss cheese? Well, it wasn't just about defense. It was also a massive power statement, a way for emperors to show they had the chops to marshal resources and manpower on a colossal scale. You know what they say? Nothing screams. I'm in charge here, quite like a wall that you can see from space. Or so the legend goes. In reality, this whole visible from space bit is as much of a myth as dragons or free lunch. No astronaut has ever confirmed seeing the Great Wall from the moon, and frankly, it's about time we stopped repeating that tall tale. Now, let's talk economics, because building a wall that covers the distance from New York to Los Angeles and back doesn't come cheap. The economic toll was staggering. We're talking about a project that spans centuries, with costs that would make even the most extravagant modern infrastructure projects blush. The Qin dynasty, which kick-started the whole affair in earnest around 221 BCE, didn't just wave a magic wand to conjure up materials. They had to mobilize an army of laborers, scholars, estimate around hundreds of thousands, if not millions, throughout the wall's construction phases. And these weren't paid contractors with health benefits and retirement plans. No, many of these laborers were conscripted soldiers and convicts, essentially slaves working under brutal conditions. The human cost was as monumental as the wall itself. The exact number of lives lost is anyone's guess, but some estimates suggest hundreds of thousands perished in the process. If ever there was a literal case of blood, sweat and tears, this was it. Imagine toiling day after day, inch by inch, with little more than basic tools and sheer willpower. And while the wall might have served as a deterrent on some level, it was primarily a monument to human endurance and perhaps human folly. So, what was the real reason behind this Herculean effort? Sure, keeping out those pesky nomads was part of it, but it was also about control and stability within. It was a way to manage the movement of goods and people, enforce tax laws, and maintain a semblance of order in an expansive empire that was as difficult to manage as a herd of cats. The wall was a line in the sand, a very big, very expensive line that said, This is where our civilization ends and the great unknown begins. While we're debunking myths, let's address another popular misconception. The Great Wall was not built in a day, a year, or even a century. It took over 2,000 years of construction, destruction, and reconstruction across various dynasties, each adding their own flavor to the mix. The Ming dynasty, which ruled from 3068 to 1644, was responsible for much of what we see today. They reinforced and expanded the wall using bricks and stone, making it look more like the iconic image that pops up in coffee table books and less like the rough-hewn earthworks of earlier dynasties. Political motivations were as much in play as military ones. For the Ming emperors, the wall was a way to consolidate power, protect economic interests, and keep the ever-tenuous peace with neighboring tribes. It was a grand gesture, the ancient equivalent of drawing a line in the sand with a neon marker. But as impressive as it was never foolproof. Borders were porous, and diplomacy often mattered more than bricks and mortar. In the end, the Great Wall stands as a testament to the complexity of human ambition. It's a physical representation of a nation's resolve to protect its people and resources, while simultaneously showcasing the lengths to which rulers would go to maintain control. It's a story of triumph and tragedy, of ingenuity and hubris, wrapped in stone and legend. And as we gaze upon its winding path today, we ought to remember not just the emperors who ordered its construction, but the countless faceless laborers whose lives were spent laying its foundation. So, as we continue our journey through the military innovations of ancient China, let's keep in mind that the stories are never as simple as they seem. Myths and legends are woven into the fabric of history, but underneath the romantic veneer is a gritty reality that speaks more to human nature than to fairy tales. The Great Wall, in all its sprawling glory, is living proof that history is as much about what we choose to remember as it is about what actually happened. And as we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient tapestry, more surprises await on the horizon. Stay tuned. But let's leave the Great Wall behind for now. Grab your metaphorical reins, because we're galloping into the realm of chariots and cavalry, where the romance of thundering hooves meets the reality of logistical chaos. Spoiler, your Netflix-inspired dreams of heroic chargers might be about to take a hit. First off, let's give a nod to ancient China's charioteers. These guys were the rock stars of early warfare, a status that was less about their flair for the dramatic and more about their ability to navigate a battlefield with a two-wheeled death machine. The Shang dynasty, around 1600-246 BCE, was among the first to harness the power of the chariot, and it didn't take long for these noble steeds and their riders to become the VIPs of military strategy. But before you start picturing Ben-Hur-style races with a Confucian twist, here's the catch. Chariots were more about mobility and intimidation than actual combat. They were like the ancient equivalent of cruise missiles, impressive to watch and even more impressive as a psychological weapon. Yet the real headache wasn't the riding, it was the feeding. Horses, those noble beasts, have appetites to match their stature. A single warhorse could munch through 10 kilograms of fodder a day, and if you think hay is just a bunch of dried grass, try telling that to an army's supply officer. Now multiply that by hundreds or even thousands, and you've got an ancient logistical nightmare that would make modern quartermasters weep into their MREs. Here's where the sheer brilliance of strategy comes galloping in. Ancient Chinese rulers realized that you can't just ride around with a hungry cavalry. You need a plan, and that plan involves a lot of oats. Enter the nomads, those enigmatic horse whisperers of the steppes. The nomadic tribes, like the Xiongnu and later the Mongols, were less about settling down and more about mastering the art of living on the move. They were the original road warriors, and their influence on Chinese military tactics was profound. These tribes had perfected the logistics of mobility, and their skills didn't go unnoticed by the dynasties that bordered their lands. By the time the Zhou dynasty rolled around 246-256 BCE, cavalry units began to complement the chariots. This was a game-changer. The cavalry, with their speed and agility, could outmaneuver any chariot, no matter how fancy the paint job. But again, we hit that logistical wall. Feeding the cavalry wasn't just about oats. It was about ensuring entire supply chains ran smoothly, from the fields to the front lines. It's like running a fast food chain. Your burgers are only as good as your supply of buns. And while we're on the subject of nomadic influence, let's talk about the art of the raid. These weren't your run-of-the-mill loot and scoot affairs. The nomads perfected the hit-and-run tactic, striking swiftly before melting back into the landscape. It was a strategy that played to their strengths. Horses that could gallop for miles without tiring, and warriors who could shoot arrows as easily as breathing. The Chinese had to adapt, and they did, incorporating these tactics into their own military playbooks. It was less about standing your ground and more about making your enemy chase shadows. Of course, this wasn't just about military might. It was an economic equation. Horses didn't just cost oats, they needed stables, grooms, and blacksmiths, the whole medieval AAA package. Maintaining a cavalry was like running a small city on the move, complete with its own set of headaches. But the payoff? A well-fed, well-trained cavalry could turn the tide of a battle faster than you can say armored division. Yet, the romance of the cavalry charge hides a harsher reality. Battles were not just won by the swiftest or the strongest, they were won by those who could endure the longest. And endurance was often more about logistics than heroics. The Song dynasty, 961–2079 CE, knew this all too well. They faced the Mongols, who were the undisputed masters of horse warfare. The Song had to innovate, relying on gunpowder and crossbows to defend against cavalry charges that could decimate their ranks. It was a classic case of brains versus brawn, with the Song using technology to level the playing field. Now, let's pause and consider the economic impact. Horses weren't just a military asset, they were a sign of wealth. Owning a stable of war horses was like owning a fleet of sports cars today. You were the envy of your peers, but your wallet took a hit every time you filled up the tank, or in this case, the feed bag. The Tang dynasty, 618–907 CE, for instance, invested heavily in their cavalry, understanding that control of the Silk Road and the riches it brought depended on their ability to project power across vast distances. They knew that a cavalry unit could cover up to 100 kilometers in a day, bringing both commerce and conquest within reach. But let's not get carried away by the glamour of galloping hooves. The reality was that maintaining such a force required constant attention to detail. Horses got sick, needed rest, and couldn't just be replaced like worn-out sandals. And then there was the human factor. Riders needed training, discipline, and the ability to work as a cohesive unit. The cavalry wasn't just a collection of skilled horsemen, it was a mobile community that lived, ate, and fought together. So, what's the takeaway from all of this horsing around? The use of chariots and cavalry in ancient China was less about dashing charges and more about the quiet brilliance of logistics and adaptability. It was about learning from your neighbors, even if those neighbors were sometimes the ones raiding your back garden. It was about understanding that in warfare, as in life, the devil is in the details. And those details, whether they be oats or arrows, could make all the difference between victory and defeat. In the end, the strategic use of cavalry and chariots in ancient China was not just a testament to military prowess, but also to the complex dance of innovation, adaptation, and sheer perseverance. As we continue to explore the military innovations of ancient China, remember, behind every hoofbeat lies a story of ingenuity and endurance. Stay tuned, because the ride isn't over yet. Speaking of rides that aren't over yet, let's crank up the heat, literally, and dive into one of ancient China's most fiery legacies, gunpowder. Picture this: an alchemist's workshop somewhere in Tang Dynasty China around the 9th century. This isn't a Harry Potter scene with bubbling cauldrons and mystical smoke. Nope, this was a place where science and mysticism did a precarious dance. Alchemists were the original chemists, trying to concoct an elixir for immortality. Instead, they stumbled upon the recipe for mayhem gunpowder. Here's the kicker: the discovery was about as accidental as slipping on a banana peel. These early chemists were mixing saltpeter, potassium nitrate, charcoal, and sulfur, aiming for eternal life, but instead igniting something far more explosive. It's like trying to bake a cake and ending up with a fireworks display. The concoction they created wasn't just a scientific oddity, it was a game changer that would eventually reshuffle the deck of warfare across continents. Initially, gunpowder's potential wasn't immediately obvious. Forget cannons and muskets. Think more along the lines of fireworks and firecrackers. The Chinese were pioneers of pyrotechnics, using gunpowder in religious ceremonies and celebrations to ward off evil spirits. It was a spectacle, a cacophonous blend of colour and sound that lit up the night sky and made even the most stoic onlooker gasp in awe. Talk about unintended consequences. An attempt at immortality giving rise to the world's first 4th of July celebrations. But let's not get too caught up in the sparkly distractions. The real magic or menace, depending on your perspective, came when military minds got wind of this explosive concoction. By the Song dynasty, 960–2079 CE, gunpowder had found its way onto the battlefield. And no, it didn't start with guns blazing. The earliest military uses were far more pragmatic, if a bit underwhelming by today's standards. We're talking about fire arrows, crude bombs, and the delightfully named thunder crash bombs. These innovations were less about precision and more about sheer chaos. Imagine a battlefield where the noise was as much a weapon as the shrapnel. The thunder crash bomb was essentially a clay pot filled with gunpowder and metal shards, an ancient grenade that relied more on shock and awe than on accuracy. It was war by sensory overload, designed to disorient and terrify as much as to maim or kill. And if you think that sounds brutal, you're not wrong. But in a world where survival often hinged on who could innovate first, it was brutally effective. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Was gunpowder's discovery a stroke of genius or a happy accident? The answer is a little bit of both. The alchemists were undoubtedly brilliant in their experimental pursuits, even if their goals were more mystical than military. But the leap from fireworks to firearms wasn't a straight line. It took centuries of trial and error, of tinkering and testing, to transform gunpowder into the backbone of military might. And it was the Chinese who laid the groundwork for this transformation, even if other cultures would later refine and redefine its use. Economically speaking, gunpowder was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it required resources, saltpeter, sulphur, charcoal, that needed to be mined, refined, and transported. This wasn't a simple matter of turning up at the local hardware store. It was a logistical challenge that demanded organization and foresight. On the other hand, gunpowder promised a new kind of warfare that could potentially reduce the need for massive standing armies. Why train thousands of soldiers when a handful of gunpowder-wielding warriors could do the job more efficiently? Of course, the reality was more complex. Gunpowder didn't replace manpower, it augmented it. The Song dynasty, for example, still faced relentless pressure from northern invaders, including the formidable Mongols. Gunpowder weapons gave them an edge, but they weren't a panacea. The Mongols, with their exceptional horsemanship and strategic acumen, were not easily cowed by a few firecrackers. Still, the psychological impact of gunpowder weapons was undeniable. They could turn the tide of battle by breaking the enemy's morale, proving once again that war is as much about the mind as it is about muscle. But let's circle back to the myth versus reality theme. Gunpowder's legend is often draped in the romantic narrative of the lone genius or the eureka moment. In truth, it was a collective effort, a tapestry of contributions from countless anonymous hands. The alchemists who first mixed those volatile ingredients couldn't have imagined the Pandora's box they were opening. And as gunpowder spread along the Silk Road, it picked up new ideas and innovations like a snowball rolling downhill. Each culture it touched added its own twist, leading to the smorgasbord of explosive technology that would dominate military history for centuries. So, what's the takeaway here? Gunpowder's story is a testament to human curiosity, ingenuity, and, yes, a fair bit of luck. It's a reminder that history is rarely a straight line from point A to point B. It's a zigzag of discoveries and detours, of happy accidents and deliberate designs. And as we continue to unravel the threads of ancient China's military innovations, it's clear that the past is full of surprises, some of them as explosive as a firework in the night sky. Our journey through the annals of gunpowder is far from over. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to tell. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into this explosive chapter of history, where the quest for immortality gave way to the art of destruction. Now, let's zoom out and take a bird's-eye view of the legacy those ancient Chinese innovations left behind. From the crack of a crossbow to the rumble of a cavalry charge, these inventions were the building blocks of a military tradition that's still echoing through modern warfare, like the unforgettable clang of a gong. Imagine being an ancient Chinese general, peering through the misty horizon, and realizing you've crafted a military machine as complex as a Sudoku puzzle, but twice as effective. To understand the full impact, we've got to dive into the nitty-gritty of how these military advancements reshaped not just the battlefield, but also the society that supported it. Chinese innovations weren't just about creating chaos with gunpowder or scaring the wits out of soldiers with a wall as long as the Great Wall. They were about building a bureaucratic army that ran like a well-oiled machine. This wasn't your garden variety bunch of rowdy warriors. It was a disciplined force, meticulously organized and strategically deployed, like a game of chess where every piece had its purpose. The idea of a bureaucratic army was revolutionary. It meant that power wasn't just about who could swing a sword the hardest or shout the loudest. It was about logistics, planning, and making sure every soldier knew exactly where they stood in the grand tapestry of war. The Tang dynasty, for instance, took this concept and sprinted with it, organizing their troops into units that could be mobilized at the drop of a hat or a bamboo scroll to be more period accurate. This system allowed for a standing army that could be expanded or contracted as needed, making it as flexible as a seasoned yogi. And it was all held together by a bureaucratic class that was as indispensable as it was invisible. But why does this matter? Because it laid the groundwork for how modern armies operate today. The concept of a standing army, ready and able to respond to threats and opportunities alike, owes a significant debt to these ancient Chinese innovations. Think of it like the difference between a garage band and a philharmonic orchestra. Both make music, but one's got a bit more structure. And while we're on the topic of structure, let's not overlook the philosophical shifts these innovations inspired. Enter Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese military strategist whose name has become synonymous with strategic brilliance. His magnum opus, The Art of War, written during the tumultuous Warring States period, is less a how-to guide for battlefield brutality and more a treatise on the psychology of war. Sun Tzu posited that the best way to win a battle was by not fighting it at all. Instead, he advocated for deception, intelligence, and cunning, a playbook for outthinking rather than outmuscling your opponent. It's the ancient equivalent of winning chess in 3 moves, knowing your enemy better than they know themselves. Sun Tzu's ideas were radical for his time and have since become a cornerstone of military strategy worldwide. Even corporate boardrooms have adopted his teachings, proving that whether it's on the battlefield or in the boardroom, the principles of strategy remain timeless. It's like the ultimate crossover episode where ancient warfare meets modern business acumen. But as we wrap up our journey through the annals of ancient Chinese military innovation, it's crucial to acknowledge the blend of myth and reality in how these feats are remembered. The romantic notion of noble warriors and epic battles tends to overshadow the harsh realities of war. The truth is, for every Sun Tzu crafting strategies, there were thousands of unnamed soldiers slogging through mud, facing the terrifying prospect of combat, and often paying the ultimate price. Warfare wasn't a romantic saga, it was a brutal necessity driven by survival and ambition. So, what's the big takeaway from this epic tale of ancient military genius? It's that history is a complex web of innovation, adaptation, and human tenacity. It's about the inventions that changed the course of warfare and, by extension, the world. It's about recognizing the unsung heroes, the strategists, the laborers, the soldiers who contributed to these advancements, often without fanfare or recognition. As we ponder the legacy of these innovations, it's clear that they weren't just about winning battles, they were about shaping civilizations. They laid the foundation for modern military tactics, influenced philosophical thought, and demonstrated the incredible capacity of human ingenuity. And while the myths may add a touch of magic to the story, the reality is that these innovations were the result of hard work, perseverance, and a relentless pursuit of progress. In the end, the legacy of ancient Chinese military advancements is a testament to the enduring power of innovation and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to think differently. As we close the chapter on this historical journey, let's carry forward the lessons learned and remember that history, much like a well-crafted strategy, is both an art and a science, a dance of chaos and order. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that the myths and the realities, woven together, create a tapestry of human achievement that continues to inspire us in our own battles, both big and small. In the bustling streets of Tuskegee, Alabama, Far from the grand halls of power and influence, little Rosa Macaulay was learning about the world in a way that no textbook could teach. Born on February 4, 1913, Rosa Parks, as history would come to know her, spent her early years in a place where the summer heat was intense and the social climate, well, even more so. Now, Tuskegee wasn't just famous for its airmen or its university. No, it was the kind of town where injustice was as common as sweet tea. Rosa's parents, James and Leona Macaulay, taught her lessons that you couldn't find in any curriculum. Her father was a carpenter, building a future one plank at a time, while her mother was a schoolteacher, instilling in Rosa the value of education as fiercely as she grilled her on multiplication tables. This was Alabama in the early 20th century, a place where separate but equal was the law of the land, except it was more like separate and barely adequate if you weren't white. By the time Rosa was a teenager, she was already familiar with the absurdity of segregation laws. Forget the notion of a romantic Southern charm. For Rosa, it was more like Southern harm. At one point, a young Rosa had to walk miles to the one-room schoolhouse for black children, while white kids got to ride a gleaming yellow chariot school bus right past her. Talk about a daily reminder of inequality. Yet, Rosa's education at the Montgomery Industrial School for Girls and later at the Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes was where her sense of justice really took root. This was no highfalutin college experience, think more grit and grind than ivy-covered halls. But Rosa wasn't just learning reading, writing, and arithmetic. She was figuring out how to navigate a world designed to keep her in her place. Let's pause for a quick reality check. Alabama's segregation laws weren't just about keeping water fountains separate. They were a full-body workout in frustration, a daily grind of indignities. Rosa got a taste of this when she had her first encounter with the Montgomery City bus system. If you've ever been stuck in traffic on a hot day, you might get close to understanding the kind of slow burn this was. Here's where the myth-busting comes in. Popular law would have you believe Rosa was meek and mild until she hit her historical stride. But even as a young woman, she had a backbone made of steel. She'd sit in the coloured section of the bus and resist the urge to roll her eyes every time she had to pay at the front, then hop off and re-enter through the back door. By the way, if the bus was too crowded, guess who had to give up their seats? Spoiler alert, it wasn't the folks in front. Her time at the Alabama State Teachers College wasn't just about academic smarts, it was about street smarts. Rosa was learning how to fight with dignity in a world that was anything but. She was soaking up the knowledge that would one day fuel her activism, all while dealing with the harsh realities of Jim Crow laws that hung over the South like a bad smell. In the 1930s, Alabama wasn't exactly the land of opportunity for African Americans. Jobs were scarce, and discrimination was as common as a Baptist church on a Sunday morning. Yet, Rosa was determined to carve out a life for herself. She married Raymond Parks in 1932, a barber by trade and a fighter for racial equality by passion. Raymond was a member of the NAACP, and he introduced Rosa to the organization. Rosa's involvement in the NAACP would be a game-changer, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Now, let's not get too starry-eyed about this period of her life. It wasn't all civil rights meetings and defiant bus rides. Rosa and Raymond lived in a world where the KKK was more active than a caffeine-fueled toddler. They had to navigate a society where standing up for your rights could lead to, at best, a job loss and, at worst, a lynching. Still, Rosa was undeterred. She worked as a seamstress, stitching clothes and, unknowingly, the fabric of the civil rights movement. Her life was a patchwork of resistance, sewn together with threads of determination and resolve. Every act of quiet defiance, every stand she took, was a stitch in the larger quilt of justice. So there you have it. Rosa Parks's early life was a masterclass in resilience, a blueprint for standing firm when the world wanted you to sit down. As a young woman in Alabama, she faced a barrage of challenges, each one sharpening her resolve and preparing her for the pivotal role she'd play in American history. She wasn't just a tired seamstress who refused to give up her seat one day. She was a lifelong fighter for justice, molded by her experiences and ready to make her mark. Stay tuned, because this is just the opening act in Rosa Parks's incredible story. From the patchwork of her early years, Rosa Parks was ready for the next chapter, a role that would prepare her for history's spotlight, even if it involved a lot more paperwork than glamour. Enter the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which Rosa joined in 1943. Now, if you're picturing a well-oiled machine with shiny offices and a big budget, think again. This was more grassroots than greenbacks, and Rosa dove in headfirst, taking on the role of secretary. Let's pause here for a quick myth-busting session. Being a secretary wasn't about fetching coffee or filing papers while wearing a poodle skirt and pearls. Rosa's role was far from mundane. She was the organizational backbone, the one who kept the gears turning while facing the absurdities of a deeply segregated society. Her position involved everything from keeping minutes to coordinating meetings, all while shadowed by the constant threat of violence that loomed over civil rights work like a dark cloud. In her capacity as a secretary, Rosa also wore the hat of an investigator. Sounds like a role straight out of a detective novel, right? Except this was no fiction. She was documenting cases of racial injustice and discrimination, which was as dangerous as it was necessary. Rosa wasn't just jotting down notes, she was gathering evidence in a world where the scales of justice were tipped like a seesaw with an elephant on one end. And let's not kid ourselves, this wasn't just about being thorough. This was about survival, ensuring the stories of those wronged were recorded and given a chance at justice, no matter how slim. Rosa's investigative work often took her into the heart of danger, dealing with cases that would make anyone's blood boil. Consider this. In the 1940s, lynching still cast a long shadow over the South. From 1882 to 1968, over 4,700 people were lynched in the United States, with the vast majority being African Americans in the South. It's not like there was a hotline where you could report such atrocities. Rosa had to dig deep and often discreetly. She was navigating a minefield, and each step forward was a testament to her courage. Her work wasn't just about confronting racism, it was a full frontal assault on the absurdity of the Jim Crow laws. Imagine building a case in a world where separate but equal was the official line but not the lived reality. It was like being told you're getting a gourmet meal and receiving a slice of cold toast. Rosa's task was to expose these contradictions, shining a light on the systemic inequities that plagued African Americans daily. The absurdity wasn't confined to the legal system. The economic disparities were staggering too. In 1940, the median income for black families in the United States was about $500 a year, while white families earned nearly $1,300. That's a difference of more than 60%, and we're not talking about pocket change here. This was the economic reality Rosa and her community faced, with limited access to quality jobs, education, and housing. The deck was stacked, and Rosa knew it, so she worked tirelessly to shuffle the cards in favor of justice. Rosa's involvement with the NAACP wasn't without its risks. She and Raymond were acutely aware that their activism painted targets on their backs. The threat of retaliation was omnipresent, but the Parks couple was undeterred. They were playing a high-stakes game of poker, with a system that always dealt a bad hand to people of color. Yet, fold wasn't in Rosa's vocabulary. She was all in, and her resolve only deepened with each case she took on. So, what did all this mean for Rosa's future? Well, it was a masterclass in resilience, a lesson in standing firm in the face of overwhelming odds. Her work with the NAACP was like a dress rehearsal for the moment the world would come to know her for. She was documenting the injustices, fighting the good fight, and doing so with a grace that belied the chaos around her. But this wasn't just about preparing for a single moment. Rosa's work with the NAACP was about building a legacy, laying the groundwork for a movement that would eventually change the landscape of American society. She was part of a network of activists who were challenging the status quo, one case file at a time. Each meeting held, each letter typed, and each injustice documented was a step towards a future where equality wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. As we wrap up this segment of Rosa's incredible journey, remember this: she wasn't just a seamstress who got tired one day and decided to sit down. She had been standing up for justice long before she made history by refusing to give up her seat on that Montgomery bus. Her work with the NAACP was a crucial part of her story, a testament to her unwavering commitment to civil rights and equality. And trust me, the best is yet to come. Rosa Parks was on the brink of making history, but her groundwork with the NAACP was the foundation upon which she would build her legacy. Stay tuned, because things are about to get even more interesting. As Rosa Parks was preparing to take her stand, the stage wasn't just set by chance. It was more like a well-rehearsed play with a script full of courage and a cast of determined activists. December 1, 1955 wasn't just another day on the calendar. It was the culmination of careful planning and a lifetime of pent-up resolve. Let's dive into this pivotal moment, but first, let's kick some myths to the curb. Forget that old chestnut about Rosa being just a tired seamstress who spontaneously decided she'd had enough. Oh no. Rosa Parks was not just weary from a day of stitching hems, she was fed up with a society that insisted on stitching up justice. Sure, she had spent the day at her job at Montgomery Fair, a local department store, but her resolve was anything but an impulsive whim. This was a strategic move, not a spur-of-the-moment decision made because she couldn't find a comfy seat. Rosa Parks had been actively involved with the NAACP for more than a decade by then. A tired seamstress? More like a seasoned civil rights strategist. She was fully aware of what her actions could spark, and weighing the risks wasn't a new exercise for her. This was Alabama, after all, where the consequences of defying segregation could be as severe as they were swift, but Rosa's decision to stay seated was more calculated than chaotic. Here's a quick geography lesson on the Montgomery City lines. The front of the bus, reserved for white passengers, was like the VIP section at a concert, and the back, for black riders, was more like standing room only, even when seats were available. The middle? A grey area, often literally and figuratively, where the rules changed depending on how capricious the driver felt that day. On that fateful December afternoon, Rosa Parks took her place in the first row of the coloured section, a spot that was as precarious as it was strategic. When the bus became crowded, the driver, James F. Blake, ordered her and 3 other black passengers to vacate their seats for a white man. Imagine that. A single seat for one white passenger was more important than 4 seated black individuals. Talk about skewed priorities. Rosa's refusal to stand wasn't just a personal act of defiance. It was a calculated move that resonated with a community ready for change. When she famously said, no, it wasn't because her feet hurt, it was because she was tired of the moral foot-dragging that defined segregation. Her arrest set off a chain reaction that would ignite one of the largest grassroots movements in American history, the Montgomery bus boycott. Here's where the myth-busting gets juicy. The boycott wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction, but a well-oiled machine ready to roll. The Women's Political Council, WPC, led by Joanne Robinson, had been chomping at the bit for an opportunity to challenge the bus segregation laws. Even before Rosa's arrest, the WPC had warned city officials that a boycott could be coming if conditions didn't improve. When word of Rosa's arrest spread, they sprang into action like a finely tuned orchestra hitting the crescendo. Within hours, 35,000 flyers were printed, calling for a one-day boycott of the buses on December the 5th, the day of Rosa's trial. The logistics were mind-blowing. In an era before email or smartphones, this was a feat of community coordination that would make even today's event planners sweat. These flyers were hand-delivered, foot-sprinted across the city, and distributed through churches, schools, and local businesses. It was a masterclass in organization, and everyone was in on it. The economic stakes were high. The Montgomery City lines relied heavily on black passengers, who made up about 75% of their ridership. That's right, 3 out of every 4 seats were filled by the very people the system sought to marginalize. By staying off the buses, the black community wasn't just making a statement, they were hitting the city's wallet where it hurt. They understood that, in the language of commerce, dollars spoke louder than words. The boycott was a pressure cooker of community solidarity. Carpools were organized, and those with cars became the unofficial chauffeurs of the movement. Churches turned into bus stops, and local leaders like E.D. Nixon and Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as the public faces of the protest. King, a relatively unknown preacher at the time, would soon become synonymous with civil rights, but at that moment he was just as much a part of the grassroots effort as anyone else. As the boycott stretched from days to weeks and then months, the resolute spirit of the Montgomery black community faced off against the stubbornness of city officials who refused to budge. The economic impact was significant. The transit company reported losses of $3,000 a day, that's about $30,000 in today's dollars, a financial hemorrhage that couldn't be ignored. But the city and the bus company were not the only ones feeling the pinch. The black community faced economic pressures of their own. Many lost jobs or were threatened with termination for participating in the boycott. Yet, The resolve was ironclad. It was a classic case of, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, and the city's kitchen was burning with a fervour for justice. Eventually, the legal system had to step in. On November 13, 1956, nearly a year after Rosa Parks's arrest, the US Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. It was a momentous victory, but let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't a fairy tale ending with everyone holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The road to desegregation was still fraught with resistance and resentment. So, there you have it. Rosa Parks wasn't just a tired seamstress who couldn't find a seat. She was a key player in a well-coordinated symphony of defiance and determination. Her refusal to stand was the catalyst for a movement that galvanized a community and rattled the status quo. The Montgomery bus boycott was a testament to what can be achieved when people come together and say, enough is enough. And as we leave this chapter open, ready to explore more in the next parts, remember that the story of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott isn't just a tale of sitting down to stand up. It's a reminder that when justice seems out of reach, sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is stay right where you are. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of a movement that would reshape the landscape of civil rights in America. With the Supreme Court's decision to strike down bus segregation, the Montgomery bus boycott stood as a colossal achievement. A David and Goliath story, where the little guy didn't just aim for the forehead, but went for a full knockout. But let's not get carried away with fairy tale endings here. The boycott's victory was more like the roller coaster's first drop, exhilarating, yes, but just the beginning of a wild ride. So, what really did it take to keep this bus boycott rolling for over a year? Buckle up, because we're about to dive into the nitty-gritty of logistics, economics, and a community's unwavering resolve. First, let's talk logistics, the unglamorous backbone of any grand endeavour. You see, the black community in Montgomery wasn't just sitting around waiting for change. They were orchestrating a symphony of carpools, walking shoes, and sheer grit. Imagine this. 40,000 black commuters needed alternatives to the buses every single day. And no, they didn't just Uber their way around town. This was 1955, folks, before GPS and ride-sharing apps. Instead, the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, helmed by a young and charismatic Martin Luther King Jr., became the air traffic control of this ground game. Carpool systems were devised with the precision of a military operation. Ministers and community leaders like E.D. Nixon and Joanne Robinson were the generals in this fight, coordinating rides and rallying spirits. Drivers volunteered their cars, which ranged from the reliable to the please don't break down today variety, and gasoline became the lifeblood of the boycott. It's worth noting that gas wasn't exactly cheap then, about 23 cents per gallon, which, adjusting for inflation, was like pouring liquid gold into those gas tanks. Now, if you think keeping this moving was as easy as a Sunday drive, think again. The police weren't exactly fans of this new carpool craze. They attempted to disrupt these efforts by ticketing drivers for the most minor infractions. Ever being pulled over for a broken taillight? Imagine that times 100. And yet, the community remained undeterred, finding creative ways to keep their makeshift transit system chugging along. The boycott wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, it was a financial muscle flex. Remember, black residents made up 75% of Montgomery's bus ridership. That's 3 out of every 4 seats on those buses filled by individuals whose nickels and dimes kept the wheels turning. By walking instead of riding, they were sending a message in a language that even the most stubborn city officials could understand: cold, hard cash. The Montgomery City lines hemorrhaged about $3,000 daily, which translates to roughly $30,000 today. For a city that relied on public transportation revenue like a kid relies on candy, this was a punch to the gut. And let's not forget the economic gauntlet thrown down on the boycotters themselves. Many faced financial strain and job threats for participating. Employers, especially those who were less than sympathetic to the cause, wielded the power of the purse like a weapon. Yet the community's resolve was ironclad. Churches, the heart of the black community, became more than spiritual havens. They turned into logistical hubs and financial lifelines. Donations poured in to keep the carpool engines running and spirits high. People dug deep into their pockets, each cent a testament to their commitment to justice. the boycott's success wasn't confined to the buses. It set the stage for the civil rights movement's next acts, proving that collective action could indeed reshape society. The world was watching, and the message was clear. Change was coming, whether the country was ready or not. It was like seeing the first domino fall in a chain reaction, each piece a symbol of the status quo crumbling under the weight of justice. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While the Supreme Court's ruling was a monumental win, the implementation was a different beast altogether. Montgomery didn't roll out the welcome mat for integration, and the journey to equality was fraught with resistance. Determined to maintain their traditional way of life, which is a polite way of saying segregation forever. Violence and intimidation were the go-to tools for those who couldn't stomach the idea of sharing a bus seat with someone who didn't look like them. White citizens' councils popped up like weeds, yet for every act of sabotage there was an equal and opposite act of resilience. The black community in Montgomery didn't just want a seat at the table, they wanted and deserved equal footing on the bus, in schools, and in society. The boycott was a microcosm of a much larger struggle against a deeply ingrained system of racial oppression. The broader implications of the boycott were seismic. It was a clarion call that resonated beyond Montgomery, inspiring other civil rights actions across the United States. The Freedom Riders, the sit-ins, the marches, all were built on the foundation laid by the foot soldiers of Montgomery. The boycott demonstrated the power of strategic, non-violent protest, a blueprint that would guide activists for years to come. So, while the buses in Montgomery eventually desegregated, the fight for civil rights was far from over. The boycott was a significant chapter, but not the whole book. It was proof that change was possible, but it also underscored the long road ahead. As we leave this part of Rosa Parks' story, remember that her refusal to give up her seat wasn't just a moment of defiance, it was a catalyst for a movement that would continue to evolve and challenge America to live up to its ideals. And as we prepare to dive into the next segment of this historical journey, let's keep the momentum rolling. The Montgomery bus boycott was a pivotal moment, but it was just the beginning of a much larger story, a story that would continue to unfold in the streets, in the courts, and in the hearts of those who dared to dream of a more just world. Stay tuned, because the ride is far from over. And so, as the buses in Montgomery finally rolled forward with integrated seating, you'd think the world would throw a parade, right? Not quite. The battle won was but the opening skirmish in a much larger war. Rosa Parks, the woman who became the face of this incredible movement, didn't just ride off into the sunset. No, she was barely getting started. After the boycott, Rosa and Raymond Parks found themselves in a bit of a pickle. Life in Montgomery became increasingly untenable due to the backlash from their activism. The Parks were subject to constant harassment and threats so colourful they could make a sailor blush. The duo eventually packed up and moved to Detroit in 1957, a city that would become Rosa's new battleground for social justice. Now, if you're thinking that Detroit was a racial utopia compared to the Jim Crow South, think again. The city might not have had the same segregation laws, but racial discrimination was as entrenched as a stubborn stain. In Detroit, Rosa continued to fight the good fight, working alongside Congressman John Conyers, who was one of the first African Americans elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She served as his secretary for over 2 decades, from 1965 to 1988, which is a pretty big jump from the Montgomery NAACP, both in scope and in stakes. But let's not sugarcoat it. Rosa's post-boycott life wasn't all civil rights victories and peaceful marches. She faced economic hardships that would make even the most frugal penny pinchers clutch their wallets. Despite her national fame, she struggled with employment and financial stability. In 1955, the Parks' combined income was around $3,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $30,000 today, not exactly rolling in dough. Rosa Parks' activism wasn't confined to her office work. She supported movements like the Black Power movement and the anti-apartheid efforts in South Africa. She even took part in events that highlighted the plight of prisoners and the homeless, proving that her sense of justice was as wide as it was deep. Rosa was a woman who didn't just talk the talk, she walked the walk. A lot of it, in fact, given her history with boycotting buses. But let's bust some myths while we're at it. Rosa Parks is often portrayed as the quiet, dignified seamstress who became an accidental hero. In reality, she was a seasoned activist long before her historic bus ride. her fierce determination and strategic mind were not overnight developments. This was a woman who spent decades fighting for civil rights, not just the face of a single moment of defiance. And speaking of legacy, let's talk about the ripple effect. Rosa Parks's actions and the ensuing Montgomery bus boycott were pivotal in the civil rights movement, setting the stage for future landmark events like the March on Washington in 1963 and the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Her influence touched not only those who marched with her, but also inspired future generations to stand or sit for what is right. The myth of Rosa as an accidental activist is appealing but reductive. It's like calling Da Vinci that guy who doodled a couple of paintings. Rosa Parks was a deliberate, calculated force in the civil rights movement, and her legacy is anything but accidental. Her actions showed that ordinary people could spark extraordinary change, and that's the kind of legend that doesn't need embellishment. Even in her later years, Rosa Parks was a living testament to the power of resilience. In 1999, she was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. Not bad for someone who supposedly just got tired and sat down, right? Her later recognition was proof that her contributions went far beyond a single act of defiance. Rosa Parks passed away on October 24, 2005, but her legacy lives on. Streets, schools, and awards are named in her honor, but more importantly, her spirit continues to inspire movements for racial equality and human rights around the world. The bus ride that sparked a revolution was just one chapter in a life dedicated to justice, a life that reminds us that the fight for equality requires not only courage, but also relentless dedication. So, as we wrap up this journey through the life of Rosa Parks, remember that history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives, each one contributing to the larger picture. Rosa Parks was more than a passenger on a bus. She was a driver of change, steering the civil rights movement toward a future where justice and equality aren't just ideals to strive for, but realities to live by. And as you close this chapter, think of Rosa not just as a figure from the past, but as a beacon guiding us toward a more just tomorrow. They say death is the great equalizer, but in ancient Egypt, it was more like a VIP entrance to the afterlife. If you had the right connections, and a flair for ceremony, that is. Welcome, curious minds, to the world of Egyptian burial rites, where the afterlife wasn't just a concept, but a full-time obsession. Our story kicks off with Osiris, the original influencer of the realm beyond, whose epic tale of murder, dismemberment, and resurrection set the stage for centuries of elaborate funerary practices. Osiris wasn't just any god, he was the god of the afterlife, the underworld, and the dead. He was also a poster child for sibling rivalry gone wrong. His brother Set, the god of chaos, was a bit too keen on the whole chaos aspect, and decided that Osiris would look better in pieces. After a family feud that makes your Thanksgiving dinner look like a peace summit, Osiris was chopped up into bits and scattered across Egypt. But wait, there's more! Osiris's wife Isis wasn't having any of Set's nonsense. She went on a scavenger hunt of divine proportions, reassembling Osiris and giving him a second chance at life, albeit as ruler of the afterlife. Now, you might wonder why this myth mattered so much. Well, it gave the Egyptians a blueprint for eternity. If Osiris could conquer death and rule the afterlife, so could you, if you played your cards right. This belief trickled down into the nitty-gritty of mummification and burial rites. Think of it as a cosmic checklist. Preserve the body, prepare for judgment, and secure a spot in the eternal realm. And here's where it gets delightfully complex. Mummification, the pièce de résistance of Egyptian funerary practices, wasn't for the faint of heart or the shallow of pocket. This process took about 70 days, a time span that could test the patience of even the most dedicated afterlife enthusiast. The star of the show was natron, a naturally occurring salt that was more valuable than a modern-day celebrity endorsement. This magical mineral was essential for drying out the body, ensuring that all-important preservation. If the embalming process sounds a bit like a cross between a spa day and a chemistry class, you're not far off. Now, let's talk logistics. While the pharaohs and the elite enjoyed the Rolls-Royce treatment, complete with gold masks and intricate sarcophagi, the average Joe, or should I say average Joe, had to make do with more modest accommodations. But regardless of social standing, the goal was the same: tiptoe past Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, and make it to the field of reeds, the Egyptian version of paradise. And then there's the brain. Ah, the brain, that mushy organ that modern folks hold in such high esteem. To the ancient Egyptians, it was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. During mummification, some poor soul, let's call him the brain scooper, had the unenviable job of extracting it through the nose. Talk about a nose job gone wrong. You'd think there'd be some divine retribution for such a task. But alas, history remains silent on the fate of our anonymous cranial excavator. Despite the obsession with immortality, the Egyptians weren't immune to a good curse story. The curse of the pharaohs is the stuff of legend, supposedly bringing doom to anyone who dared disturb a tomb. But here's the catch: most of these tales are as real as a $3 bill. Sure, a few unlucky souls might have met untimely ends, but that's more likely due to ancient pathogens than a vengeful mummy. The real curse? The endless cycle of looters and archaeologists, eager to uncover treasures and truths alike. In the grand tapestry of history, Egyptian burial rites stand out as a testament to humanity's eternal struggle against oblivion. They remind us that while the journey might end, the stories and the rituals live on. So, the next time you ponder the mysteries of the past, spare a thought for Osiris and his unwitting acolyte, the brain scooper. After all, they helped lay the groundwork for a civilization that dared to dream beyond the grave. Now, as we segue from the grisly details of mummification to the grandiosity of pyramid construction, let's talk about those colossal stone triangles that have dominated the Egyptian skyline for millennia. These weren't just your average decorative tombstones. They were the ultimate keeping up with the Joneses, on a scale that makes modern McMansions look like garden sheds. First up, let's tackle the age-old myth that the pyramids were built by slaves. Hollywood might have you picturing sweaty masses under the whip, but the reality is more like a unionized construction site. Archaeological digs at Giza revealed workers' villages, complete with evidence of healthcare, wages, and even ample beer rations. That's right, these folks were paid in bread and beer, which, let's be honest, sounds like a college student's dream. The labor force was a well-oiled machine consisting of skilled workers, not the oppressed masses of cinematic lore. And let's not forget the absurdity of it all, constructing a 2.3 million stone block pyramid for a single ruler. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu around 25 AT to 256 BCZ, stands as a testament to human ambition and perhaps a touch of vanity. Each block weighed between 2.5 to 15 tons, and yet these ancient engineers managed to assemble them with such precision that even our modern tools would struggle to replicate it. It's like building a massive game of Jenga, with stones the size of small cars, but with no room for error. This was less about practicality, and more about ensuring that Khufu's afterlife digs were the swankiest in the neighborhood. Economics played a pivotal role in this monumental endeavor. Pyramid building wasn't just about honoring the gods or showcasing royal power. It was also Egypt's early version of a national jobs program. During the annual Nile flooding, agriculture came to a halt. And what better way to keep the populace busy and the economy chugging along than by employing thousands in the construction of these grand structures? The pyramids were a win-win, a divine statement, and an economic stimulus package rolled into one. Now, if you ever wondered why these pyramids have such staying power, it's because they were designed with a cunning mix of engineering genius and sheer audacity. The ancient Egyptians were masters of logistics, transporting limestone blocks from nearby quarries and granite from Aswan, a mere 500 miles away. They utilized the Nile as their highway, floating the heavy stones on specially crafted boats. It's a logistical feat that would have given today's supply chain managers a run for their money. But these projects weren't just about bricks and mortar, they were deeply entwined with social and political fabrics. The construction of pyramids was a demonstration of a pharaoh's divine right to rule, a celestial insurance policy that they hoped would solidify their status in the afterlife as much as it did their legacy on earth. It was a physical manifestation of Ma'at, the concept of cosmic balance and order, a guiding principle that kept Egyptian society ticking along. Yet, while the grandeur of these structures is undeniable, they also highlight the absurdity of dedicating so much effort to the afterlife while the living toiled endlessly. Pyramid building was an exercise in excess, a statement of power, ambition, and the peculiar human tendency to build edifices that outlast their creators by millennia. In the end, these pyramids, despite their monumental nature, weren't just about the pharaohs they housed. They were the result of an entire civilization's labor, ingenuity, and yes, a little bit of crazy. So, the next time you gaze upon a pyramid, remember, it's not just a pile of stones, it's a symbol of humanity's eternal quest to leave a mark on history, even if it means turning a desert into an architectural wonderland. And as the dust settles on this chapter, we'll leave the story open, ready to dive deeper into the next phase of ancient Egyptian life and the ever-fascinating dance between life, death, and immortality. As the dust settles on our pyramid tour, let's pivot to a different kind of blueprint. The Ancient Egyptian How-To Guide for the Afterlife, the Book of the Dead. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of a centuries-old self-help book, remember that this wasn't just idle reading for a quiet afternoon. This was your all-access pass to eternity, a veritable cheat sheet for navigating the treacherous waters of the afterlife. Picture this. You're an ancient Egyptian with a one-way ticket to the great beyond, and the Book of the Dead is your travel companion. Forget packing light. This tome is your security blanket, crammed with spells, rituals, and the kind of advice that makes a modern-day life coach look like a slacker. The book itself wasn't a single volume, but a collection of texts known as spells, 190 of them, to be exact, that were often customized to suit the buyer's needs. Think of it as the original personalized playlist. Only instead of tunes, you've got incantations to ward off pesky demons and ensure a smooth entry into paradise. But let's get real for a second. Carrying around a document stuffed with 190 chapters of post-mortem instructions seems less like a spiritual safeguard and more like a bureaucratic nightmare. Imagine the ancient equivalent of flipping through a massive user manual, desperately searching for spell 125 because you just realized you're about to face the weighing of the heart ceremony and you forgot your lines. The practicality of it all? Questionable, to say the least. And yet, the Egyptians were nothing if not thorough in their quest for immortality. An excerpt from one of the spells, let's say spell 30b for instance, gives you a taste of the stakes involved. It's all about ensuring your heart doesn't rat you out during judgment. The heart was considered the seat of intelligence and emotion, and it was weighed against Ma'at's feather of truth. If the scales balanced, congrats. You were off to the field of reeds. If not, say hello to Ammit, the soul-devouring beast with a hunger for the unrighteous. Talk about high stakes, no pressure. The Book of the Dead was less about metaphysical musings and more about cold, hard preparation. It was your cosmic insurance policy, a mix of spiritual guidance and ancient Egyptian legalese. And while it might sound a bit bonkers to us now, it was a reflection of the Egyptians' deep-seated belief in the afterlife's complexity and the need for meticulous preparation. Our ancient friends didn't just wing it when it came to eternity. They planned, plotted, and prepped with the dedication of an overzealous party planner. What's particularly fascinating is the economic side of the spiritual saga. These texts were a commodity, a tangible expression of one's devotion and status. A top-tier version of the Book of the Dead, with lavish illustrations and custom spells, was a luxury item, affordable only to the well-heeled elite. Wealthier Egyptians would have entire papyri commissioned, complete with vibrant depictions of the afterlife's trials and tribulations. Meanwhile, the less affluent might opt for an abridged version, still pricey, but within the realm of possibility if you saved your shekels. And here's where we debunk another myth, the idea that every Egyptian was buried with a personal copy. In reality, these texts were as much a status symbol as a spiritual guide. The average Egyptian wasn't strolling into the afterlife with a bespoke papyrus scroll under their arm. Instead, they relied on oral tradition, communal rites, and perhaps a more budget-friendly version with just the essentials. It's the ancient equivalent of opting for a no-frills, economy-class ticket to eternity. Yet, despite the practicality issues and economic barriers, the allure of the Book of the Dead is undeniable. It paints a vivid picture of a society obsessed with the afterlife, where death was not an end, but a new beginning, and one that required a little strategic planning. These texts are a testament to the Egyptian knack for ritual and symbolism, a reflection of their unique approach to life and death. So, as we continue our journey through the sands of time, let's keep our eyes on the prize, the eternal afterlife, where the truly prepared enter unscathed. The Book of the Dead was more than just a guide. It was a statement of belief, a tangible expression of a civilization's hopes, fears, and aspirations. It's a reminder that no matter how much changes, the human desire for control over the unknown remains a constant thread through history. As we unravel more mysteries of this ancient culture, we'll find that the stories they left behind are as enduring as the monuments they built. As we tumble further down the rabbit hole of ancient Egyptian burial customs, let's pivot to the main event, the funeral ceremony itself. If you thought a modern-day wedding was an organizational nightmare, buckle up. Ancient Egyptian burials were the Oscars of antiquity, a spectacle of divine proportions where your seat in the afterlife was the ultimate award. Picture this. It's showtime in the land of the Nile, and the star of the day is none other than the dearly departed. Let's call them Pharaoh Jones. The Egyptians didn't do things by halves. They turned saying goodbye into an all-singing, all-dancing extravaganza. The ceremony kicked off with a procession that could rival a Mardi Gras parade, complete with mourners, priests, and enough incense to set off a smoke alarm. The priests, our ancient MCs, played various roles in this funeral pageant. The Sem priest, easily spotted by his leopard skin cloak, was the headliner. He performed the opening of the mouth ceremony, a kind of spiritual CPR intended to reawaken the senses of the deceased. Forget mouthwash. This ritual had the deceased tasting, seeing, and hearing in the afterlife. Talk about a posthumous facelift. Now, this wasn't a one-man show. The ceremony required a full cast of priests, each with their own job description. The Ka priest was responsible for ensuring the deceased's soul, or Ka, had all the sustenance it needed. Think of him as the cosmic catering manager. Then there was the Heri Seshta, the overseer of mysteries, whose job it was to keep the whole affair on track. Imagine a wedding planner with a penchant for the occult. And let's not forget the economic context. These priests weren't volunteering their time out of the goodness of their hearts. The cost of hiring this spiritual dream team was substantial, often reserved for the elite. We're talking about a price tag that could fund a small kingdom, or at least a decent-sized chariot collection. It was a status symbol, a testament to how much you valued your ticket to eternity. The grand procession moved from the deceased's house to the tomb, a journey that could stretch for miles depending on the location. This wasn't a quick jaunt down the road, it was a full-on parade, complete with musicians playing the sistrum, a kind of ancient tambourine, and mourners wailing like banshees. The louder the cries, the more respect shown for the dead. Or at least that's what the neighbours were meant to think. It was social signalling in its earliest form. As the procession reached the tomb, the theatricality ramped up to 11. The tomb, often a lavishly decorated mastaba or a hidden chamber in a pyramid, was not just a final resting place, but a portal to the afterlife. The walls were adorned with scenes from the deceased's life, a kind of ancient Instagram feed, capturing their best angles for eternity. The offerings were laid out, bread, beer, and beef, a feast fit for a pharaoh, ensuring the deceased wouldn't go hungry on their journey. Here's where we smash another myth, the idea that everyone got this royal treatment. For the average Egyptian, this procession was a tad more modest. They didn't have the budget for a full Broadway production. Instead, they might opt for a scaled-down version with close family and a local priest, perhaps throwing in a couple of extra mourners if they were feeling fancy. It was the ancient equivalent of a no-frills package, same destination, fewer bells and whistles. But why all this grandeur? Beyond the obvious desire to secure a comfy afterlife, this theatrical send-off was a statement of social status. It reinforced the deceased's place in society, even in death. It was a final hurrah, a last chance to show off your wealth, power, and piety. The Egyptians were savvy enough to know that while you couldn't take it with you, you could certainly let the world know you'd had it. This ceremony also served as a community event, a chance for the living to reaffirm their own beliefs and connections. It was a binding force, a reminder of the cultural glue that held society together. The rituals, as elaborate as they were, reinforced the societal hierarchy and the divine order, ensuring Ma'at, the principle of cosmic balance and justice, was upheld. And here's the kicker. While the ceremony was all about the deceased, it was equally about those left behind. It provided closure, a sense of continuity, and a reminder that life, like the Nile, flows on. The Egyptians might have been obsessed with the afterlife, but they knew that the living had to keep living too. So, as we wrap up this act in our historical drama, let's marvel at the sheer spectacle of it all. The ancient Egyptians turned funerals into a theatrical masterpiece, blending religion, economics, and social status into one final, unforgettable performance. It's a testament to their ingenuity, their beliefs, and, yes, their flair for the dramatic. As we continue this journey into the past, keep your eyes peeled for more tales of grandeur, ambition, and the eternal quest for immortality. After all, the show must go on. And so, as the curtain falls on our ancient Egyptian funeral extravaganza, let's shuffle sideways into the evolution of these burial practices. Because, just like your favorite soap opera, Egyptian funerary rites didn't just stop at season 1. Oh no, they evolved, adapted, and occasionally went off the rails like a reality show in its later seasons. Over the millennia, the Egyptians weren't the only players on the Mediterranean stage. Enter the Greeks, the Romans, and a smorgasbord of other cultures, all vying for airtime in Egypt's historical drama. These foreign influences brought their own flair to the burial game, leaving their mark on the rites like a celebrity guest appearance. Fast forward to the Ptolemaic period, around 305 BCE, when the Greeks took over and Cleopatra was busy redefining royal drama. The Greeks added their own spin to Egyptian customs, like a DJ remixing a classic track. They blended their beliefs with those of the Egyptians, resulting in a hybrid style of burial that included both traditional mummification and Greek-style grave markers. It was a cultural mashup that would make any fusion chef proud. Then, the Romans came marching in around 30 BCE, and with them, the burial practices got another makeover. The Roman influence saw the rise of the so-called Fayum mummy portraits, realistic paintings of the deceased that were placed over the mummy's face. These portraits were the ancient version of a selfie, capturing the likeness of the deceased in vivid detail. It was a shift from the stylized depictions of pharaohs to something more personal and intimate, like swapping a royal portrait for a candid snapshot. Economically, these changing practices reflected the times. As Egypt became a melting pot of cultures, the cost of maintaining traditional rites became prohibitive for many. The lavish ceremonies of old gave way to more practical, budget-conscious affairs. In a way, it was a democratization of the afterlife, where even the less affluent could afford a dignified send-off, albeit with fewer bells and whistles. But why does this matter? Well, it highlights how burial rites are a mirror of societal change. They reflect the ebb and flow of power, culture, and economics. And just like the Egyptians, we too will leave behind tales of our own peculiar customs for future generations to puzzle over. Now, let's talk about the enduring fascination with these ancient rituals. From Hollywood blockbusters to Halloween costumes, the allure of Egyptian burial practices remains alive and kicking. Why? Because they tap into a universal human desire for immortality. That age-old quest to cheat death and leave a legacy. The idea of a meticulously planned afterlife is both romantic and absurd, a testament to human creativity and our inability to just let go. Pop culture loves a good mummy tale, and who can blame it? The combination of mystery, treasure, and the tantalizing threat of a curse makes for great storytelling. But here's the kicker. Most of these stories are about as real as the Tooth Fairy. The so-called curse of the pharaohs is more fiction than fact, a narrative concocted to sell newspapers in the early 20th century when Howard Carter stumbled upon Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. Sure, some unfortunate souls met untimely ends, but the true culprit was likely bacteria, not a long-dead king seeking vengeance. Yet, despite the myths, there's no denying the thrill of discovery. Recent archaeological finds continue to captivate the world, feeding our insatiable curiosity about how the ancients lived and died. Each new tomb or artifact unearthed adds another piece to the puzzle, offering fresh insights into a civilization that, despite its antiquity, feels oddly relatable in its desire to outwit oblivion. And here's a thought to chew on. What will future historians make of our own burial customs? Will they marvel at our gravestones and urns the way we do with Egyptian pyramids and sarcophagi? Perhaps they'll scratch their heads at our penchant for cremation or the eco-friendly trend of turning ashes into trees. Maybe they'll find our funerals quaint or our eulogies perplexing. Whatever the case, like the Egyptians before us, our rituals will reveal much about who we are, our hopes, and our fears. In the end, the story of Egyptian burial practices is a tale of evolution, adaptation, and the relentless human pursuit of legacy. It's a reminder that while the specifics may change, the underlying themes remain constant. We all want to be remembered, to leave a mark, to ensure that our story echoes through the corridors of time. So, as we wrap up this journey through ancient Egyptian afterlife customs, let's tip our hats to our ancient counterparts. They knew how to put on a show, how to blend belief with spectacle, and how to turn the ultimate final act into a grand performance. Their legacy lives on, whispering through the sands of time, reminding us that while life may be fleeting, the stories we tell can endure forever. And as we ponder our own place in history, let's take a page from their book, perhaps not the Book of the Dead, but rather the one that teaches us to live fully, love deeply, and leave behind tales worth telling. In the heart of Warsaw, Poland, during the late 19th century, a young girl named Maria Skłodowska was busy defying the odds stacked against her in a way that only a future two-time Nobel laureate could manage. Now, when I say Maria, you might know her better as Marie Curie, but before she became the scientific legend we all love to name, drop at trivia nights, she was just a kid navigating a city under Russian rule, a rule that wasn't exactly known for its love of Polish culture or women in science. Growing up in Warsaw in the 1860s and 70s wasn't a walk in the park, more like a walk through a park where every tree is labelled "no trespassing." You see, Poland was under the thumb of the Russian Empire, and the Tsar had a knack for stamping out anything that smelled too Polish. Schools couldn't teach Polish history, and speaking Polish in class was about as popular as a skunk at a garden party. But in the Skłodowska household, defiance was practically a family tradition. Maria's father, Władysław Skłodowski, was an educator himself, and he was about as fond of the Russian educational system as cats are of water. He taught his children Polish history and language on the sly, turning their home into a covert classroom. Now, if that doesn't sound like the plot of a spy thriller, I don't know what does. But this wasn't just some rebellious phase, it was a calculated risk. Władysław was committed to providing his children with an education that aligned with their heritage, even if it meant risking his job. And risk it he did. Władysław lost his position as a school principal for his insubordinate ways, and was relegated to teaching in less prestigious schools. The pay cut was real, folks. Suddenly, the Skłodowskis were scraping by, renting out rooms to make ends meet. Yet, despite these setbacks, education remained the family's North Star. Maria was a sponge for knowledge, soaking up everything from physics to chemistry, with an enthusiasm that would make most professors weep with joy or fear, depending on how well they were prepared. Now, it's one thing to be a girl in love with science today, where you can at least Google women in STEM and find a few role models. In the 19th century, however, the landscape was a bit more barren. Women in science were rarer than a unicorn sighting, and formal education for girls was a luxury, not a right. But Maria was not one to be deterred by societal norms. Her family's underground education was just the beginning. In 1891, Maria took the plunge and moved to Paris, enrolling at the Sorbonne. But let's pause here for a second and appreciate what that actually meant. We're talking about a young woman, in her early 20s, leaving her home country where she spoke the language fluently, to study in a foreign land. She had to learn French on the fly and survive on a diet that was sometimes just bread and tea, as her funds were about as abundant as hen's teeth. Yet she persisted. At the Sorbonne, Maria became Marie and embarked on a journey that would redefine what was possible for women in science. But before we get ahead of ourselves and dive into the alchemy of radium and polonium, let's not forget the quirky, often absurd realities of her path. She lived in a drafty garret, which sounds romantic until you remember that Parisian winters don't play around. Her living situation was less midnight in Paris and more midnight with a blanket and a candle. Through all of this, Marie maintained a sharp focus on her studies. She earned her degree in physics in 1893, first in her class no less, and then went on to get another degree in mathematics the following year. Talk about being an overachiever. But it wasn't just her intellect that set her apart. It was her relentless curiosity and her refusal to be boxed in by the constraints of her time. Marie's early scientific leanings were nurtured both by necessity and by rebellion. Her family's defiance against Russian oppression taught her to question authority and to seek truth in a world that was often more comfortable with lies. This foundation was crucial. as it prepared her for the scientific challenges she would later face. Challenges that demanded not just intelligence, but guts and grit in equal measure. So, there you have it, the makings of a scientific icon who started as a rebellious little girl in Warsaw. In a world that tried to tell her no, Marie Curie made a career out of saying, "Watch me." And that, my friends, is a legacy worth its weight in radium. Now, let's pick up where we left off, shall we? Marie Curie, a name that would soon echo through the hallowed halls of science, was just beginning her Parisian adventure. Imagine arriving in Paris in the 1890s, no Instagram, to document your croissant-eating, Eiffel Tower-gazing exploits. Marie had a different agenda, mastering the secrets of the universe. The City of Light was both a dream and a labyrinth for our young scientist. Picture cobblestone streets, bustling cafes, and a language barrier that could easily trip up anyone whose French was as rusty as a forgotten bicycle. Paris wasn't just the backdrop of Marie's story, it was a character in its own right. The city was a magnet for intellectuals, artists, and revolutionaries, offering opportunities as vast as its boulevards. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was far less glamorous. Marie was one of the few women at the Sorbonne, surrounded by a sea of skeptical male peers. She was like a lone wolf in a pack of doubting Thomases, all while juggling her studies with the financial acrobatics of a tightrope walker without a net. Now, tuition at the Sorbonne wasn't exactly a steal. It cost about 100 francs per year, a small fortune when your pockets are filled with lint and hope. Marie lived in a tiny attic room, a space that could generously be described as cozy if you were feeling charitable. It was more of a glorified shoebox with a view, but a far cry from the opulent Parisian apartments of literary lore. Her room was so cold in the winter that she had to study wrapped in layers, a human burrito of determination. Yet, despite these conditions, Marie was a force of nature. In 1893, she earned her degree in physics, finishing first in her class. Not content with that triumph, she snagged a degree in mathematics the following year. Her time at the Sorbonne wasn't just about hitting the books, it was about smashing through barriers like a wrecking ball of intellect. But even wrecking balls need a moment of rest, and Marie's respite came in the form of a fateful meeting. Enter Pierre Curie, a physicist with a penchant for crystals and quirky charm. Their meeting was less meet-cute and more meet-awkward, facilitated by a mutual friend who thought they'd make quite the scientific power couple. In a world where swiping right wasn't an option, introductions were a bit more personal. Pierre was captivated by Marie's intellect, while Marie found a kindred spirit in Pierre, a man who didn't just tolerate her scientific aspirations but celebrated them. Their courtship was a series of intellectual exchanges, a dance of ideas that would eventually lead to a partnership as fruitful as it was unconventional. Now, let's talk about Pierre for a moment. He was no ordinary fellow. By 1895, when he and Marie tied the knot, Pierre was already an accomplished physicist. He was known for his work on magnetism, and he had a habit of wearing his socks inside out, a charming quirk that Marie found endearing. Their wedding was refreshingly unorthodox, with Marie donning a dark blue outfit, practical and perfect for lab work. Forget the white gowns and lavish ceremonies. This was a union built on a mutual love of science and an understanding that sometimes romance means sharing a laboratory. The Curie household was a hub of scientific inquiry, a place where test tubes and textbooks were as common as teacups. Their collaboration was a symphony of brains and brawn, each pushing the other to new heights. Marie's focus on radioactivity, a term she coined, was a game-changer. She and Pierre worked tirelessly, often late into the night, in a makeshift lab that looked more like a shed than a scientific sanctuary. This was no pristine, state-of-the-art facility. It was a drafty, leaky old building that seemed to defy safety standards at every turn. If you think your office is a nightmare, imagine working with radioactive materials in what was essentially a glorified barn. Their work was grueling, but in 1898 they announced the discovery of two new elements, polonium, named after Poland, and radium. Talk about a power couple. It was as if they'd found the keys to a cosmic candy store. But before you get swept away by the romance of their scientific breakthroughs, remember that their work with radioactive materials was slowly poisoning them. Gloves and protective gear weren't in vogue, and they handled radium like it was table salt. The glow in the dark allure of radium was mesmerizing, but it was a siren song that carried a deadly tune. Financially, the Curies were still far from prosperous. Funding was scarce, and they often relied on the generosity of fellow scientists and institutions who recognized the value of their work. The couple's dedication was unwavering, even as they faced skepticism from those who couldn't fathom a woman playing a pivotal role in such groundbreaking research. Marie was not just breaking glass ceilings, she was vaporizing them with radioactive energy. The Curies' work was a testament to human perseverance and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Their love story was entwined with their scientific endeavors, two threads woven together into a tapestry of discovery and devotion. As Marie continued to explore the mysteries of the atomic world, she did so with a tenacity that redefined what was possible for women in science. But this was just the beginning of her journey. There were more challenges ahead, and not all of them would be solved with equations. Marie's story is one of grit and brilliance, a narrative that defies the odds and reshapes the landscape of science. Her time in Paris was a crucible of transformation, turning a young Polish student into a scientific trailblazer. Yet, as groundbreaking as her work was, it was far from the end of her story. The world wasn't finished with Marie Curie, and she wasn't finished with the world. As we leave her in the late 1890s, poised on the brink of even greater discoveries, remember that her legacy is not just in the elements she discovered, but in the barriers she shattered along the way. Stay tuned. There's more to come in this saga of science and resilience. As Marie Curie stood on the cusp of the new century, her mind was buzzing with possibilities, much like the radioactive elements she had so boldly unveiled. The late 1890s were a whirlwind of discovery and dogged determination for Marie and Pierre Curie. Radioactivity, the term Marie herself coined, was not just a scientific curiosity, it was a Pandora's box of potential that threatened to rewrite the very rules of physics. But let's not get too wrapped up in the romance of it all. The reality? It was messy, grueling, and, quite frankly, dangerous. The Curie's lab was a masterclass in organized chaos. Picture a place that makes your cluttered garage look like a showroom. Their makeshift laboratory was tucked away in an old, drafty shed at the School of Physics and Chemistry in Paris, a space that would make OSHA inspectors weep. Forget state-of-the-art equipment, they were working with hand-me-downs and salvaged gear that would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. Yet the Curies were nothing if not resourceful. They had what mattered most, relentless curiosity and an unyielding work ethic. Now, let's talk about Pitchblendy, the unsung hero or villain, depending on your perspective of this story. This unassuming, uranium-rich ore was the raw material that the Curies painstakingly processed to extract radium and polonium. But this wasn't a case of wandering into a mine and coming out with a Nobel Prize. Oh no. Extracting radium from pitchblende was akin to finding a needle in a radioactive haystack. For every ton of pitchblende, the Curies could only extract about 1/10 of a gram of radium. Yes, you heard that right, 1/10 of a gram. It was the ultimate test of patience and precision. The process involved dissolving the pitchblende in acid and then isolating the radium through a series of chemical reactions that were as complex as they were hazardous. Let's just say that if you're the type to get queasy around household cleaners, you might want to sit this one out. The Curies handled these materials with little to no protection. Gloves and masks weren't exactly part of the scientific wardrobe back then. The result? Marie and Pierre were exposed to levels of radiation that would make your Geiger counter tremble in fear. Their workdays were marathons of mental and physical exertion. The Curies often toiled late into the night, their lab illuminated by the ghostly glow of radium. To any outsider, it might have looked like a scene from a mad scientist's lair, but for Marie and Pierre, it was just another day at the office. They didn't have the luxury of modern conveniences, and their laboratory attire was pragmatic at best. Marie's iconic dark blue dress, chosen for its practicality in the lab, was a far cry from the image of a glamorous scientist. She wore it like a badge of honor, a testament to her commitment to her craft. Despite the harsh conditions, the Curie's work was nothing short of revolutionary. Their research on radioactivity laid the groundwork for modern nuclear physics, and their discoveries had implications far beyond the confines of their drafty lab. It was as if they were holding a lantern in a dark tunnel, illuminating the path for future generations of scientists. But let's not forget the toll it took on them personally. The very elements they were so fascinated by were silently wreaking havoc on their bodies. The Curies were often fatigued and suffered from various ailments, yet they pressed on, driven by a passion that burned brighter than the radium they studied. The financial reality of their situation was as grim as their health prospects. Despite their groundbreaking discoveries, the Curies were not rolling in dough. Scientific research wasn't exactly a cash cow, and securing funding was a constant struggle. They relied on grants and the goodwill of fellow scientists to keep their work afloat. It was a tough gig, but Marie and Pierre were in it for the long haul. They weren't chasing fame or fortune. They were in pursuit of knowledge, and in that pursuit, they were unstoppable. Their dedication paid off in 1903 when Marie and Pierre, along with Henri Becquerel, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for their joint research on radiation phenomena. This accolade was a game-changer, putting the Curies in the global scientific spotlight. But while the world was busy applauding, the Curies remained grounded in their work, their eyes firmly on the next horizon. For Marie, the Nobel Prize was not just a personal triumph, but a validation of her role as a pioneering woman in science, a role she embraced with humility and grace. But even as she basked in the glow of her achievements, Marie was acutely aware of the shadows that lurked. The health risks associated with their research were becoming increasingly apparent. The very radium that had brought them acclaim was also a silent predator, eroding their health with each passing day. The irony was not lost on Marie, who, despite the risks, continued to explore the mysteries of radioactivity with undiminished fervor. Marie Curie's journey was far from over. Her story is one of resilience and brilliance, a testament to the power of human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of truth. As we leave her in the early 20th century, standing on the threshold of even greater discoveries, remember that her legacy is not just in the elements she isolated, but in the barriers she shattered along the way. The saga of Marie Curie continues, a story that defies the odds and reshapes the landscape of science with every step she takes. Stay tuned, the best is yet to come. As the early 20th century dawned, Marie Curie stood poised on the brink of even more groundbreaking achievements, her determination as radiant as the elements she had discovered. Her story was far from a fairy tale, but the world was captivated by it nonetheless. You see, Marie's journey was about more than just scientific discovery. It was about rewriting the script on what women could achieve in the male-dominated realm of science. Fast forward to 1911, when Marie clinched her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry. That's right, folks. Marie was the first person ever to earn a second Nobel, and she was just getting warmed up. While the first Nobel had acknowledged her joint work with Pierre, this one was all hers, recognizing her services to the advancement of chemistry by the discovery of the elements radium and polonium, the isolation of radium, and the study of the nature and compounds of this remarkable element. If you think she threw a lavish party to celebrate, think again. Marie was more likely to be found in her lab coat than a cocktail dress, surrounded by beakers instead of bubbly. But with fame came a fresh set of complications. Marie, who had once toiled in obscurity, now found herself under the media's unrelenting gaze. The press had a field day, turning her into a celebrity and, at times, a caricature. Articles painted her as a lone genius, a narrative that, while flattering, oversimplified the collaborative nature of her work. The romantic notion of Marie as the solitary alchemist was more appealing to newspaper editors than the truth of her collaborative efforts and the grueling work involved. The public, enamored by the idea of a female scientist, often missed the point. They adored the image of Curie as a symbol of female empowerment, yet many were unaware of the sacrifices she had made. The reality was that Marie's hands-on work with radioactive materials came with a hefty price tag, her health. The very radium that fascinated her was also a stealthy adversary, contributing to the illnesses that plagued her later years. Despite these personal costs, Marie remained resolute. Her work had set off a seismic shift, not just in the scientific community, but also in everyday life. Her discoveries laid the foundation for the development of X-rays in surgery, a technological leap that would save countless lives. During World War I, she even helped equip ambulances with X-ray machines, training women to operate them on the front lines. Talk about a legacy that glows brighter than radium. Yet, not everyone was a fan. The scientific world was a minefield of egos, and Marie's successes didn't sit well with everyone. Professional skepticism was a constant companion, particularly from those who couldn't quite wrap their heads around a woman outshining them in the lab. The misogyny of the era was as radioactive as the elements Marie studied, and she often faced an uphill battle for recognition and respect. Even as Marie navigated the choppy waters of fame, her personal life was no less tumultuous. The loss of Pierre in 1906 had been a devastating blow, one that left Marie grappling with profound grief while raising their 2 daughters. The romanticized version of her life often glosses over these struggles, painting her existence as one of unbroken triumph. But the reality was more complex. Marie was a pioneer, yes, but she was also a widow, a mother, and a woman battling the same societal constraints she sought to dismantle. In the wake of Pierre's death, Marie had taken over his teaching post at the Sorbonne, becoming the first woman to teach there. This was no small feat, and it came with its own set of challenges. Her lectures drew crowds, not just for their content but out of curiosity about the woman behind the legend. It was a testament to her resilience that she continued to push boundaries, even while standing in the shadow of personal loss. Marie's story was a tapestry of contradictions. She was a beacon of progress and a victim of its costs, a revered scientist and a misunderstood figure. Her life was a testament to the dual nature of fame, the adulation and the scrutiny, the accolades and the criticisms. She was a trailblazer in a field that wasn't quite ready for her, and her legacy was as much about her perseverance as it was about her discoveries. As we leave Marie Curie on the precipice of yet more scientific inquiry in the early 20th century, remember that her legacy is as multifaceted as the elements she unearthed. Her contributions to science were monumental, but they came with personal costs that are often overlooked in the annals of history. Marie Curie was not just a name in a textbook. She was a force of nature, a testament to what can be achieved when curiosity and courage collide. Her story, much like her work, continues to resonate, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey filled with both challenges and triumphs. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the saga of Marie Curie. There's more to this tale of resilience and brilliance than meets the eye. Marie Curie's story, much like the radioactive elements she studied, continues to emit a profound glow well after the initial discovery. As the curtain rises on the next chapter, we're diving into the establishment of the Radium Institute, a place that would become a beacon for scientific research long after its founder had left the building. But let's not sugarcoat it. Getting this institute off the ground was about as easy as herding cats in a thunderstorm. The Radium Institute, founded in 1914, was Marie's brainchild, and it was as much a monument to her life's work as it was a hub for pioneering research. Located in Paris, its establishment was a testament to her vision and tenacity. Marie had secured funding from the University of Paris and the Pasteur Institute, a feat not unlike squeezing water from a stone, given the financial constraints of the time. The institute was built to house her research on radioactivity, a field she had practically invented, and to train the next generation of scientists, women included. Yes, Marie was setting the stage for future female scientists to step into the spotlight, a spotlight that had been glaringly male-dominated. The building itself wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a symbol of scientific progress. The Radium Institute was equipped with state-of-the-art facilities, at least by early 20th century standards, and provided a collaborative environment for researchers to explore the mysteries of the atomic world. Under Marie's leadership, the Institute became a powerhouse of scientific innovation, attracting some of the brightest minds of the era. It was here that breakthroughs in the medical application of radium would take place, ultimately leading to advancements in cancer treatment that have saved countless lives. Talk about a legacy that keeps on giving. Marie Curie's influence didn't stop at the lab's walls. Her impact rippled through the scientific community like a stone in a pond, albeit a stone made of pure radium. She inspired legions of scientists, particularly women, who saw her as a trailblazer, a living testament to the fact that gender should never be a barrier to genius. Among her protégés was Irene Joliot-Curie, her own daughter, who would go on to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry with her husband, Frédéric Joliot-Curie, for their work on artificial radioactivity. The Curie legacy was proving to be a family affair, and Irene's achievements were a direct result of the doors Marie had kicked open with the force of a battering ram. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. While Marie's scientific contributions were lighting up the world, her public image was undergoing a transformation that was as radioactive as her research. The press, ever eager to craft a narrative, fixated on Marie as a scientific icon, a sort of Madame Radium glowing with brilliance. Yet, this romanticized image often glossed over the gritty realities of her life. The health issues caused by prolonged exposure to radiation, the relentless scrutiny she faced as a woman in a man's world, and the personal sacrifices that punctuated her journey. In the decades following her death in 1934, Marie Curie's story was catapulted into the realm of pop culture. From films to biopics, her life has been portrayed with varying degrees of accuracy, often leaning heavily into the mythos of the solitary genius. While these portrayals have kept her legacy alive, they've also simplified her narrative, glossing over the collaborative efforts and personal struggles that defined her career. Yet, in recent years, there has been a concerted effort to demystify Marie Curie's life and work. Scholars and historians are peeling back the layers of myth to reveal a more nuanced picture of her achievements and challenges. They're reminding us that Marie was not a lone wolf, but part of a pack of brilliant minds who were collectively pushing the boundaries of science. It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is rarely a solo endeavor, and that even the brightest stars shine brighter in a constellation. So, what lessons can we glean from Marie Curie's story today? For one, her unwavering commitment to her work in the face of adversity is as relevant now as it was then. In a world still grappling with gender disparities in STEM fields, Marie's legacy serves as a powerful reminder of what can be achieved when resilience meets intellect. Her life's work laid the groundwork for modern medical treatments, including radiotherapy, which continues to save lives. Marie Curie's contributions are woven into the very fabric of scientific progress, a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and determination. Marie Curie left behind more than just a legacy of scientific discovery. She left a blueprint for challenging the status quo and advancing human knowledge, one radioactive element at a time. Her story is a poignant reminder that the path to greatness is often littered with challenges, but it is precisely these challenges that make the journey worthwhile. As we wrap up this exploration of her life, let's not forget that Marie Curie was more than just a name in a textbook. She was a force of nature, a testament to what can be achieved when one woman dares to dream in a world that tells her she shouldn't. In the end, Marie Curie's legacy is not just about the elements she discovered or the accolades she received. It's about the barriers she shattered and the inspiration she provided to generations of scientists who followed in her footsteps. Her story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring impact of a life dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. So, here's to Marie Curie, a pioneer, a trailblazer, and a legend whose light continues to guide us, even as we venture into the uncharted territories of science. The sun barely peeks over the horizon when the sound of waves lapping against the wooden hull pulls you from your slumber. Welcome to Venice, 14th century style, where the daily grind involves more than just the creaky floors of the docks. It's a symphony of shouting merchants, the clattering of horse hooves on cobblestones, and the smell. The smell of 1,000 spices mingling with the scent of the sea. You, my friend, are a sailor smack in the middle of one of the busiest ports in the world, and it's time to get to work. Venice isn't just a city, it's a living, breathing, economic powerhouse, a republic that's got its fingers in every pie from Constantinople to the far reaches of the Orient. As a sailor, you're not just moving goods, you're part of a massive trade network that keeps this city afloat, literally. Your day begins at the Rialto market, the beating heart of Venetian commerce. It's not just a market, it's a microcosm of the world. Exotic wares from distant lands are spread out in a chaotic tapestry of colours and smells. Spices, silk and precious metals are traded here, but let's not forget the real star, pepper. Oh yes, pepper. That little black bead is worth its weight in gold, sometimes literally. Why pepper? Well, in a world before refrigeration, it's the magic dust that makes rotten meat palatable. And it's not just about flavour, it's about prestige. Serve your guests a pepper-laced dish, and you're not just feeding them, you're impressing them with your wealth and connections. You see, pepper isn't just a spice, it's a statement. Standing in the shadow of the Rialto Bridge, traders haggle like their lives depend on it because they do. The deals made here ripple across continents. Your role as a sailor is crucial. Without you and your fellow mariners, these precious goods would never reach their eager buyers. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality is, you're hauling cargo for hours on end, and it's back-breaking work. You're not just dealing with the physical strain, but also the ever-present threat of pirates eager to relieve you of your precious cargo. Now, let's talk money. The Venetian Republic isn't shy about taking its cut. Into the Doge, Venice's top dog in a fancy hat. Think of him as the CEO of the city-state, only with more velvet and fewer PowerPoint presentations. The Doge, along with his council, ensures that every transaction in Venice is taxed to the hilt. Tariffs are the lifeblood of the city's treasury. Goods coming in and out of Venice are taxed, and every sailor knows that taxes are as inevitable as the sunrise. To give you a sense of scale, consider this. In the 14th century, Venice's annual revenue was around 1 million ducats. Now, a ducat might not sound like much, but it's equivalent to several hundred modern dollars. That's a hefty sum filling the coffers of the Republic, keeping the city's elaborate machinery well-oiled. The Doge's administration has a reputation for being both efficient and ruthless. Miss a payment, and you might find yourself languishing in one of Venice's infamous prisons rather than enjoying a breezy afternoon on the lagoon. But it's not just about tariffs and taxes. The Venetian economy is a finely tuned machine, where trade deals are brokered with the precision of a Swiss watch. Alliances are formed and broken at the turn of a coin. The Republic's success hinges on its ability to maintain peace with its trading partners while keeping a wary eye on rivals like Genoa. It's a precarious balance, and sailors like you are the cogs in this grand machine. As you weave through the bustling market, coins clinking in your purse, it's clear that every aspect of Venetian life is intertwined with the sea and trade. The Rialto isn't just a place to buy and sell, it's where fortunes are made and lost. It's where the pulse of the Republic can be felt most keenly, and you, my intrepid sailor, are right at the heart of it all. So, take a deep breath of that salty, spice-laden air and get ready to dive into the day's grind, because in Venice, business never sleeps, and neither do you. So, you're ready to dive into the daily grind of a 14th century Venetian sailor? Well, strap in, because life on a Venetian galley is anything but the romantic seafaring adventure you might be imagining. Forget the sweeping vistas and the promise of fortune. This is more about cramped quarters, rowing until your muscles scream, and a diet that would make a medieval peasant wince. Let's start with your living space, or lack thereof. A Venetian galley isn't exactly the carnival cruise. It's more like a floating sardine can, and guess what? You're one of the sardines. Galleys were long, narrow ships, typically measuring about 130 feet in length, but only 20 feet in width. You're packed in with around 200 other sailors and soldiers, not counting the cargo that's jammed in every available nook and cranny. Privacy? Forget it. Personal space is as mythical as a sea monster. Your bed is a plank. Literally. Hammocks are for the lucky few, or the captain, who's probably snoring away in his own slightly less cramped space. As for you, you're curled up on a hard wooden bench, catching what little sleep you can before the next rowing shift. And speaking of rowing, let's talk about that unrelenting grind. You're not here to lounge on the deck with a drink in hand, you're here to row, and row, and row some more. Rowing shifts are brutal. You're looking at 8 to 10 hours a day, split into 2 shifts. Your hands blister, your back aches, and the only music is the rhythmic slap of oars against water. Romance of the sea, huh? More like a medieval gym membership from hell. Each oar is manned by several rowers, and synchronization is key. Fall out of sync, and you're in for a tongue-lashing from the boatswain, whose job is to keep everyone in line, often with the aid of a nice, sturdy whip. But let's not forget the delightful culinary offerings aboard a galley. Your daily menu is a veritable feast of monotony, hardtack, salted meat, and the occasional dried pea. Hardtack is basically a cracker's evil twin, a rock-hard biscuit that's as appetizing as it sounds. Soak it in water to avoid breaking a tooth. Salted meat is just as charming, often so briny it could make a fish thirsty. And if you're really lucky, maybe some cheese that's more mould than dairy. And we haven't even touched on the real villain of the high seas, scurvy. That's right, the infamous disease caused by a lack of vitamin C. It's a slow-motion horror show that turns gums into mush and loosens teeth until they're falling out faster than you can say, limey. Of course, limes and lemons were the eventual cure, but in the 14th century, such luxuries were as rare as a pirate's code of ethics. Ah yes, pirates. The ever-present threat that keeps you on your toes. Or rather, keeps you gripping your sword with white-knuckled intensity. The Mediterranean is crawling with them, and they're not here to play nice. Forget the romanticized image of dashing rogues with a twinkle in their eye and a song in their heart. Real pirates are more interested in relieving you of your cargo, and possibly your life, than sharing a drink and a hearty laugh. Encounter a pirate galley, and it's all hands on deck, weapons at the ready. And let's not ignore the discipline on board, which is as strict as it is swift. The captain rules with an iron fist, supported by his officers, and woe betide anyone who steps out of line. Misbehavior isn't tolerated, and punishment is meted out swiftly and publicly. Flogging is a favorite, and it's delivered with the kind of enthusiasm that would make a modern HR department faint. The goal is to maintain order, and if a little fear is needed to keep everyone in check, so be it. Yet, despite all the hardships, there's a certain appeal to this life. It's a chance to see the world, or at least the Mediterranean part of it. You're part of something bigger, a cog in the vast Venetian machine that keeps the Republic's coffers overflowing. And when the wind is in your favor, the sea stretches out before you like an endless promise. So, as you heave on the oar, squinting against the sun, it's worth remembering that while the life of a Venetian sailor is far from a glamorous adventure, it's a vital part of the Republic's success. You're not just moving goods, you're moving the world. And that, my friend, is worth a blister or two. And speaking of moving the world, let's take a closer look at the grand stage on which Venice played its part, the trade routes. Forget the old adage that all roads lead to Rome. Venice had its own web of pathways that stretched far beyond the eternal city. Imagine the Mediterranean not as a barrier, but as a bustling highway, teeming with ships, each one a thread in a vast tapestry of commerce. Venice, perched at the northern tip of the Adriatic Sea, was a gateway to the riches of the East and the markets of the West. Our sailor's journey often started in the Mediterranean, the salty cradle of civilization, but it didn't stop there. The trade routes would snake their way through the Aegean Sea, skirt the Byzantine Empire. Now there's a realm that knew how to throw a good political intrigue and wind their way to the Levantine coast. From there, the goods were funneled along the ancient Silk Road, a vast network of caravan trails that connected the east to the west like veins feeding a giant, insatiable beast. Here's where it gets interesting. Venice didn't just survive in this environment, it thrived. While the Papal States were busy with their holy business, and the Byzantine Empire was juggling its own issues, Venice danced on the geopolitical tightrope with the skill of a seasoned acrobat. The Republic's diplomats were like chess grandmasters, plotting 10 moves ahead to ensure that their trade routes remained open and profitable. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. You might picture these trade routes as a kind of ancient autobahn, a smooth ride from one exotic locale to another. Nope. The reality was more like the Wild West on water, with a healthy dose of medieval politics thrown in for good measure. Storms, pirates, and fickle alliances could derail a voyage faster than you can say maritime insurance. One major player in this grand game was the Byzantine Empire. By the 14th century, it was a shadow of its former self, like an aging rock star living off past glories. Yet, it still controlled key trade hubs like Constantinople, the city that straddled 2 continents and had a taste for gold and grandeur. Venetian merchants had long learned to navigate its complex bureaucracy and ever-shifting political landscape to ensure their galleys had safe passage through the Bosporus. But there was a new kid on the block, the Ottoman Turks. Rising with the vigour of a sprightly upstart ready to take on the world, they were the wild card in the region. Their expansion threatened Venetian interests, and they were not known for playing nice. You might think this would spell doom for Venetian trade, but here's where the Republic showed its mettle. Instead of picking a fight, Venice opted for diplomacy, negotiating trade agreements that often left their rivals scratching their heads. It's as if Venice was playing a giant game of Risk, only with real stakes and fewer dice rolls. The economic stakes were enormous. Think of the Silk Road as the Amazon Prime of the medieval world, delivering luxury goods across continents. Spices from India, silk from China, and pearls from the Persian Gulf were just a few of the treasures that flowed through these routes, and Venice was there to collect the tolls, like a savvy highway operator with a monopoly on the best rest stops. The city levied taxes on goods moving through its ports, and the ducats flowed in like water, each one a testament to the Republic's shrewdness. It's worth noting that Venetian merchants didn't just rely on the goodwill of foreign powers. They were proactive, establishing colonies and trading outposts in strategic locations. From the Greek islands to the coast of Dalmatia, these outposts were like pearls on a string, each one a way station for sailors and merchants to rest, resupply, and trade. They didn't just trade goods, they traded influence, spreading Venetian culture and securing their roots with the subtlety of a puppeteer pulling strings. But let's not gloss over the darker side of all this prosperity. The trade routes were also conduits for less savoury cargo. Slavery, an ugly reality of the time, was part of the trade network, with human lives bought and sold alongside spices and silks. It's a harsh reminder that the glittering facade of wealth often hides a grim underbelly. Yet, it was all part of the sprawling, complex machine that was Venetian trade. So, while you row your galley toward the horizon, remember that you're not just a sailor on a ship, you're part of a grand narrative, a story of ambition, commerce, and the relentless drive to connect worlds. Venice wasn't just a city, it was an idea, an audacious experiment in trade and diplomacy. And you, with every pull of the oar, are helping to write that story. As you sail these storied routes, keep in mind that behind the romance of adventure lies a reality filled with challenges, diplomacy, and the ever-present quest for profit. Venice didn't just participate in the global trade network, it helped shape it. And while the myth might be that all roads lead to Rome, the reality was that all sea routes eventually led back to Venice, the shimmering jewel of the Adriatic. Keep your eyes on the horizon, because the journey is far from over. And as you glide over the rippling blue expanse of the Adriatic, the sprawling vision of Venice looms ever closer, a city that's part fairy tale, part cutthroat boardroom. It's a place where the water laps at the steps of palaces, and where the social ladder is as slippery as the docks you'll soon be stepping onto. Let's talk status and wealth. Two commodities as coveted as the pepper and silk you're hauling. Welcome to the intricate web of Venetian society, where your place on this metaphorical ladder determines not just the cut of your clothes, but the very quality of your life. At the top, we have the patricians, a class so exclusive that even the waiting list has a waiting list. These are the families whose ancestors were smart enough, or lucky enough to be inscribed in the Libro d'Oro, the Golden Book. Think of it as the medieval Facebook. If you're not on it, good luck getting into the best parties. The patricians live in opulent palaces that make Versailles look like a modest Airbnb. We're talking marble facades, frescoed ceilings, and enough gold leaf to blind a peasant at 50 paces. They're the ones pulling the strings behind the Republic's political and economic power plays. These guys don't just have seats on the Grand Council, they own the chairs. If you're a patrician, you're probably sipping imported wine from a goblet that costs more than a sailor's annual wage. But let's slide down a rung to the cittadini, or citizens, a class of respectable merchants and tradespeople who've managed to carve out a comfortable niche for themselves. They're not exactly living in palaces, but they have a decent roof over their heads and enough spare ducats to enjoy the occasional feast. These folks are the middle managers of Venice, keeping the gears of commerce grinding smoothly. They have a voice, albeit a quieter one, in the city's affairs, and they enjoy a status that comes with a side of security. And then there's you, the common sailor, floating on the sea of social hierarchy like flotsam. You're part of the popolo, the great unwashed masses who do the heavy lifting. Literally, your life is a constant hustle, a game of survival where one wrong move can land you in dire straits. Forget about grand councils or lavish banquets. Your concerns are more immediate. Will there be food on the table tomorrow? Will your ship come back intact from its next voyage? It's a gritty grind with little room for upward mobility unless you've got the luck of a lottery winner. But hold on, let's not forget the church, that ever-present monolith that watches over this whole social spectacle like a stern schoolmaster. The Catholic Church, with its papal bulls and penchant for power plays, wields influence that rivals the Doge himself. In Venice, religion isn't just a matter of faith, it's a cornerstone of identity, a vital thread in the social fabric. Church leaders often sit on the same councils as the patricians, making decisions that ripple through every stratum of society. And here comes the kicker. The church isn't just about sermons and salvation. It's a powerhouse of wealth, owning vast tracts of land and collecting tithes with a zeal that would make a tax collector blush. In the 14th century, the church's coffers were as deep as its cathedrals were tall, and its influence was felt in every corner of Venice. Spiritual guidance? Sure. But let's not kid ourselves, this is as much about power as it is about piety. Now, let's bust some myths. You might picture Venice as a harmonious blend of commerce and culture, where everyone knows their place and plays their part. The reality? It's more like a medieval version of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of political intrigue. Behind the masks of carnival, the city is a hotbed of rivalries and alliances, a place where the line between friend and foe is as blurry as a foggy morning on the lagoon. Consider the Arsenalotti, the workers of Venice's famed arsenal, the shipyard that was the envy of the known world. These guys were the backbone of the Venetian navy, churning out galleys with assembly line efficiency long before Henry Ford ever dreamed of mass production. In the arsenal, shipbuilders worked with military precision, crafting vessels that were the lifeblood of Venetian trade and defence. Yet, despite their essential role, most Arsenalotti were stuck in a social limbo, respected for their skills but excluded from the upper echelons of power. And let's not overlook the role of women in this social tapestry. While the patrician ladies might have enjoyed a level of comfort and influence thanks to strategic marriages and family ties, the average Venetian woman's life was more concerned with the domestic sphere. Women were expected to uphold the family's honour and manage the household, a role as demanding as any sea voyage. Yet their contributions were often overlooked in the grand narrative of Venetian history. So here you are, a sailor in this grand theatre of commerce and class, where your every move is dictated by the whims of fate and fortune. As you step off the galley and back onto the cobblestones of Venice, remember that the city is as much about the people as it is about the palaces. It's a place where ambition meets reality, where the glitter of gold masks the grind of the everyday. Keep your wits sharp and your eyes open, because in Venice, the game is always afoot, and you're a player whether you like it or not. And as the sun sets over the city, casting its golden glow on the canals, you can't help but marvel at the paradox that is Venice. A city built on water, yet a pillar of power. A republic that thrives on trade, yet guards its secrets jealously. Here, every day is a dance on the edge of chaos, where fortunes can be won or lost with the turn of the tide. So, take a deep breath of that salty air, because the night is young, and in Venice the story is far from over. So, as the sun dips below the horizon, casting that irresistible Venetian glow on the canals, let's dive into the legacy your work as a sailor helps create. You see, Venice wasn't just about moving pepper and silk, it was a cultural and technological powerhouse. It's like if Silicon Valley had a love child with the Renaissance. Venetian trade didn't just fill coffers, it sparked innovations that would ripple through time like the wake of your galley. Let's start with something shiny, literally. The glass mirror, a staple of every self-respecting influencer's selfie arsenal, owes its glitzy reputation to Venice. Back in the 14th century, while most of Europe was still squinting into polished metal, Venetian artisans were perfecting the art of glass-making. Murano, the island just a short hop from Venice, was the epicenter of this glass revolution. Venetian glassmakers were like the rock stars of their day, guarded by the Republic with the intensity of a mother hen over her chicks. Leave the island with your secrets and you'd be hunted down faster than a duck in hunting season. The glass mirror wasn't just about vanity, it was a status symbol, a reflection, pun intended, of wealth and sophistication. In a world where appearances mattered as much as alliances, mirrors were the ultimate power accessory. And speaking of seeing things clearly, let's talk map-making. Venetian sailors like you weren't just hauling cargo, you were feeding the insatiable beast of geographic knowledge. Venetian cartographers turned the Mediterranean into a canvas, sketching coastlines and marking sea routes with a precision that would make Google Maps blush. The Portolan charts, as they were called, were the GPS of the medieval world. They combined practical knowledge with artistic flair, creating maps that were as much about beauty as they were about navigation. These maps weren't just tools, they were treasures, often adorned with illustrations that turned the mundane task of sailing into a visual feast. But let's not get lost in the romance of it all. The reality was that these innovations were driven by necessity as much as by creativity. Venice wasn't just a pretty face, it was a city constantly on the brink of chaos, juggling trade, politics, and the ever-present threat of war. The glass-making and map-making weren't about luxury, they were survival mechanisms. In a world where information was power, knowing the lay of the land or the subtle art of negotiation could mean the difference between triumph and disaster. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of the carefree, swashbuckling sailor. Sure, there's an undeniable allure to the idea of the open sea and the promise of adventure. But the reality, as you know from your aching muscles and blistered hands, is far from glamorous. Life on the high seas was more about grit than glory, more toil than triumph. Yet, there is a certain romance in the resilience it took just to survive. Your work as a sailor didn't just contribute to Venice's economic might, it helped shape a cultural legacy that would outlast the Republic itself. Venetian innovations in trade and technology set the stage for the Renaissance, that glorious explosion of art and science that would redefine the Western world. It's no coincidence that Venice was a hub of Renaissance activity, attracting artists, thinkers, and inventors like moths to a flame. And let's not forget the intangible legacy, the spirit of innovation, the relentless pursuit of excellence. Venice was a city that thrived on pushing boundaries and breaking molds. It was a place where the impossible was just another challenge to be conquered. This ethos, this daring ambition, is something that resonates even today. So, as you stand on the prow of your ship, watching the lights of Venice twinkle like stars mirrored in the water, take a moment to reflect on the paradox that is your life. A sailor's existence is one of hardship and hope, of endless horizons and unyielding realities. Yet, in the grand tapestry of history, your story is woven into the very fabric of Venice's legacy. You're part of a narrative that stretches beyond the confines of your time, a testament to human ingenuity and the indomitable spirit of adventure. In the end, Venice wasn't just a city, it was an idea, a bold experiment in commerce and culture that dared to dream big. And you, with every pull of the oar, every voyage across the sea, are a vital part of that dream. So, here's to you, the unsung hero of the high seas, the sailor whose toil and tenacity helped build a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. As you turn in for the night, let the gentle sway of the ship lull you to sleep, knowing that while your journey may be fraught with challenges, it's also rich with purpose and possibility. And in the end, that's what makes it all worthwhile.